Excelencias,
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. We are now going to proceed to the UPR of Venezuela. In keeping with Resolution 5.1, the review is based on the national report, the compilation of UN information, and the summary of stakeholders' information, also prepared by the OHCHR. I now have the honour to give the floor to Her Excellency, Ms. Delcy Rodriguez Gomez, Executive Vice President of the Republic and Minister of People's Power for Economy, Finance and Foreign Trade, to introduce the report. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you very much. Your Excellency, Federico Villegas, President of the Human Rights Council, on behalf of the government and the President, Nicolás Maduro, we would like to extend greetings to the members of this council, as well as the observers and the representatives of the 116 countries that signed up to participate in this UPR. 5 years ago to the day, Venezuela presented its second UPR report. Unaware of what would happen in the next cycle, the government of Obama declared Venezuela a threat to the US foreign policy and national security. This was the foundation for a whole host of unilateral coercive measures and other restrictive measures, punitive measures, without any basis in international law, that generated sanctions that were illicit and illegitimate against the whole of the Venezuelan people. 5 years went by, closing the space for exercise of human rights for Venezuelans due to the introduction of these unilateral coercive measures. There has been direct impact because of representatives of countries that are part of this Human Rights Council. In this council, there's the government of the United States of America that, in a perverse, underhand way, managed to bring about this range of coercive measures. 502 measures. In this council, there's also the government of the United Kingdom that adopted the legitimate decision to deny the Venezuelan people of their rights, and we've seen the impact of this in the COVID-19 pandemic. President and esteemed representatives, something is badly wrong when in the same room, in the same global hall or forum where we're supposed to be guaranteeing human rights, we see victims and aggressors sitting side by side. And we see this hegemonic struggle for power and domination. So we cannot be indifferent in the face of these serious violations of human rights. Be indifferent and complicit. Because one of the items on the agenda of this Human Rights Council, and we raise our voice to ensure that we shed light and study measures that can help countries that are indeed victims of such measures that violate international law. There are a number of issues to examine. The human rights system, and we have very carefully read each of the reports. I would like to explain one example, a specific example, because of the serious nature of this, and that's the report from the UNHCR. In 2020, the UNHCR certified that Colombia was the country with the largest number of IDPs because of the armed conflict and violence. 8.3 million in IDPs. But the question then is that Venezuela is a neighboring country. Where is this going to stop? The millions of Colombians that flee the violence because of the paramilitaries, the drug trade. Where did they end up? Our Colombian brothers and sisters. Of course, Venezuela's reputation goes before it, and we have a very generous system for welcoming our brothers and sisters and upholding their human rights. In 2021, there was a tendentious complaint with some failings in it, and it turned Colombia into the first country with the number of IDPs to the second country, the second country receiving the largest number of migrants. There seems to be a bit of a mathematical error there, and it's a bit dangerous because it seems to point to Venezuela, because supposedly there's an artificial creation of war, humanitarian crisis that the US has publicized as something going on in Venezuela that needs to be dealt with. Now, UNHCR and its authorities called the Venezuelan migrants economic migrants, and this is all down to the criminal embargo upon our country. We see here the political instrumentalization of human rights. Another example of this, which stems from the same thing, and this is to do with the inequality in the political of the northern part of the world, the northern hemisphere and the south. And we've seen this in the International Criminal Court of Venezuela quite recently, with the prosecutor of the ICC signed a memorandum of understanding to try to bolster, through technical assistance, our capacity within our justice system and our national jurisdiction. But when we look at the map of the cases that are before the ICC, we see that there's an imbalance between the North and the South. This imbalance is blatant also when we come to the enjoyment of international human rights. We also see the reflection of the accumulation of wealth. When we look at the difference between 1980 and 2020, look at how the wealth is concentrated in the north. Also, we have the recent events of COVID-19 and the vaccination programs. We can see the inequalities here. Look at Africa in the red, very low levels of vaccination. And this has also further entrenched the variants that have been emerging, because humanity still hasn't understood that either we move forward together to a solution or we will continue to remain divided. Another thing, and against the global context, we have the third UPR. In addition to the inequality and the accumulation of wealth, we have seen an increase in violence over the past number of years. Is this the context within which we can see the enjoyment of human rights, not just in Venezuela, but in countries of the world which have been impacted by war and conflict? And one of the most serious problems that humanity is facing, of course, is the threat to the environment and to the human species itself. This, in the context of a criminal blockade to our country, Venezuela has indeed submitted its third UPR, not without its difficulties, of course, because We have had frustrated attempts at magnicide, undermining our vital infrastructure, economic war, an expansion of unilateral coercive measures that are used as arms of mass destruction, systematically and indiscriminately affecting the enjoyment of human rights in Venezuela. So it's against this backdrop that we mention that we've brought the unilateral coercive measures to the International Court. Because, of course, as I've said, this just further entrenches the imbalance between the North and the South. But we've been courageous. Venezuela must stand up and speak out for our people in the worst kind of circumstances, the worst time, economic asphyxiation, where we've seen 99% of our income drop in 2020. Venezuela could not respond in equal conditions to the COVID-19 pandemic because our resources were blocked. The acquisition of material, of vaccines. And furthermore, the UK and the Bank of England prevented Venezuela from using its own resources to be able to deal with the pandemic in Venezuela, but we were able to deal with it because of our universal healthcare system. We're talking about distribution of wealth, but the actual concept of Bolivarian socialism, of equality, social justice, where the main concern is to ensure that human beings are at the center of every situation. By doing this, we were able to take care of our population. And we're proud to say that we have very promising numbers when it comes to the control of the pandemic. Now, we don't know what's going to happen next because, of course, there's a great deal of uncertainty surrounding the variants that may emerge. But Venezuela is firm in its belief that we can uphold our universal healthcare system. It has been successful in the way it's managed the pandemic. I must also underscore the commitment of the Venezuelan state for the full enjoyment of civil and political rights. In merely 20 years, Venezuela has held 29 elections as part of a democratic process. Venezuela also guarantees social, economic rights. We just need to look at the Gini index to see that Venezuela is one of the few least unequal countries in Latin America and the Caribbean. We have provisions for food and housing, free education, free vaccination, and this is available to the whole of the population. I must also highlight the progress we've made on consolidation and reform of our justice system. Our goal is always, of course, to uphold the human rights of the Venezuelan people. Now, we're talking about our country's heroic resistance, and today I must say that in these 5 years, since 2016 and 2022, Venezuela, at the end of the last quarter of 2021, saw a growth in its GDP of 7.7%. This is a demonstration of our people's ability, of the belief that we are a good people, we're a peaceful people, and a generous people. We've also worked hand in hand with the OHCHR. Always upholding the principles of human rights of independence, impartiality, no political interference, we accept the 193 recommendations, but we adopted 24 voluntary commitments as part of our second UPR. The system of human rights needs to be at the service of the peoples, to try to right the balances, to try to ensure that they reach out to people's conscience. Venezuela, that has been attacked and injured, can, however, show a great deal of progress. But we're also fully mindful of the challenges ahead. And this is why we have established hotlines, ways of providing assistance in cooperation with the OHCHR. Venezuela will continue to battle, will continue to fly the flag of sovereignty and self-determination. I'd like to close with the most universal Venezuelan, Francisco de Miranda, that participated in the liberation of France and the independence of the US. He said, "My only goals were and will be always to promote happiness and prosperity for my own country. Let's turn any aggressions of minorities, those that have divergent models, let's channel this into transformative energy for the social well-being of our peoples." I thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you. I'd like to thank Her Excellency for her statement. As we've done in other opportunities, I'd like to express the importance of the hybrid possibilities open to us, which has been a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. It's tried to broaden the participation at very high level, and this is something that we're seeing today. We're now going to begin our interactive dialogue. Before giving the floor to delegations for their questions and comments, I would like to remind you that the speaking time will be 55 seconds for all. I wish to reiterate that issues of a political, bilateral and territorial nature should be kept out of our deliberations, and United Nations terminology should be used when referring to states and territories. Please be reminded that the use of the words recommend or recommendation will ensure that the relevant parts of your statements are included in the recommendations section of the Working Group report. I will now refer to the list of speakers. The first delegation that has the floor is Senegal. You have the floor. Senegal would like to warmly welcome the delegation of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela to this session of the UPR. My delegation hails the remarkable progress made by Venezuela in the implementation of its recommendations put to it in its last UPR. It notes with satisfaction the strengthening of national mechanisms for protection and promotion of human rights through the National Plan on Human Rights 2016 to 2019, the broadening of access of the population to the Bureau of the Ombudsperson, amongst others. In a constructive spirit, Senegal would like to submit to the Venezuelan delegation the following recommendations. Pursue thinking to try to ratify the International Convention for the Protection of All Persons Against Enforced Disappearance. Intensify efforts to guarantee access to basic health services for all segments of the population. Senegal wishes the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela the best of success in the implementation of the recommendations it's accepted. I thank you. Thank you. I give the floor to Serbia.
The Republic of Serbia welcomes the delegation of Venezuela at the UPR session and thanks for presenting the national report. Venezuela has shown a high level of dedicated approach to the UPR process, and we commend all the measures its authorities have taken in order to respond to the UPR recommendations. We would like to recommend to Venezuela to properly address the identification and accompaniment of victims of trafficking. Serbia wishes Venezuela a fruitful review process.
Gracias.
Thank you. I give the floor to Singapore.
Mr. President, Singapore welcomes Venezuela's participation in the UPR process. We welcome Venezuela's continued efforts to support the education of children and adolescents over the reporting period. We commend Venezuela for increasing the rates of enrollment in its preschool, primary, and secondary institutions. We note that the Venezuelan government has also provided resources such as textbooks and electronic devices, and implemented the school meals program to provide at least 2 meals a day to students in 93% of public schools. Singapore recommends that Venezuela continue to pursue initiatives to enhance the education of children and adolescents at all levels. We further recommend that Venezuela consider measures to ensure the continuity of education amidst the COVID-19 pandemic. We wish Venezuela every success. Thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you. Slovakia, please.
President, we note with concern the human rights situation in Venezuela. It has resulted in the second largest migration and refugee crisis in the world. Slovakia is gravely concerned by continuous repression against the opposition and independent media, amounting to harassment, detentions, prosecutions. Slovakia recommends the following: engage with the UN human rights system by submitting overdue reports to the treaty bodies and by cooperating with OHCHR and the mechanisms of the HRC. Guarantee freedom of expression and support a plural and safe communication environment. Modify the law against hatred for peaceful coexistence and tolerance so that it cannot be used against journalists and human rights defenders. Ratify OPCRC on a communications procedure and ratify CED Convention. We wish Venezuela a successful review. Thank you, President.
Gracias.
Thank you. Slovenia, please.
Mr. President, Slovenia appreciates the national report by Venezuela. Slovenia remains deeply concerned about the significant restrictions on civic and democratic space in the country. Slovenia wishes to point out the importance of freedom and autonomy of the universities based on compliance with international standards. Slovenia would like to make the following recommendations. 1. To ratify the Convention for the Protection of All Persons from Enforced Disappearance and the optional protocol to the Convention against torture and other cruel, inhuman and degrading treatment or punishment. 2. To ensure that human rights defenders are protected from harassment, criminalization and persecution, and to adopt policy for the protection of human rights defenders. Thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you. Somalia, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. Somalia warmly welcomes the distinguished delegation from the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. We appreciate their comprehensive national report presented today and its current update. My delegation commends Venezuela's cooperation with the Human Rights Council and other United Nations human rights mechanisms. Somalia acknowledges the process that Venezuela submitted the relevant reports to treaty bodies in compliance with its international obligations. Somalia recommends to strengthen the Venezuela's national human rights protection system and coordination between the institutions responsible for the promotion and protection of human rights. We wish the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela a very successful UPR review, and I thank you, Chair.
Gracias.
Thank you. South Africa, please, via Zoom.
South Africa extends fraternal greetings and a warm welcome to the Honorable Vice President, Madam Delcy Rodrigues, and the distinguished delegation of Venezuela to this third review. My delegation welcomes the government's efforts to combating inequality and reduce poverty. South Africa wishes to respectively recommend that Venezuela continue implementing the Mama Rosa Gender Equality and Equity Plan 2019 to 2025 and continue its efforts aimed at reforming the prison system in line with the Nelson Mandela rules. South Africa wishes the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela a successful review. I thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you. South Sudan, please.
Mr. President, the delegation of the Republic of South Sudan welcomes the delegation of Venezuela and thank them for the presentation of the national report. My delegation congratulates Venezuela's efforts for actively cooperating with the Human Rights Council and its mechanism. The report signaled the positive engagement of Venezuela with the UPR mechanism. We recommend the following. One, continue with the awareness campaign within your country in order to prevent the spread of COVID-19. Continue with the vaccine process for all its inhabitants. Two, redoubling efforts of developing the action providing for in the letter of understanding signed by the Office of the Higher Commission for the purpose of strengthening, cooperating, and technical assistance in the areas of the human rights. Three, continue development action to protect the human rights of all people in face of the economic situation in the country. We wish Venezuela all the best and successful review. I thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Tiene la palabra.
I now give the floor to Spain. Thank you very much, President. We welcome the signing of the MOU with the Prosecutor's Office of the ICC in 2021. Since the last UPR, the national system for protection, guarantees and remedies has worsened. Spain recommends the following. One, to cease acts of criminalization, persecution and the imprisonment of opponents, dissidents, human rights defenders and demonstrators, and to ensure their effective freedom and security and provide reparation to victims. Secondly, to channel social, political and institutional conflicts through democratic participation and dialogue, and to put an end to all legal, financial and administrative barriers that hamper the work of civil society organisations and reduce the space available to them. Thirdly, to adopt necessary reforms to establish the independence and impartiality of the judiciary, as well as the Public Prosecutor's Office and the People's Ombudsperson as internal or domestic bodies for safeguarding the rule of law, the defence of lawfulness and the protection of human rights. Also to give access to the country to the International Independent Mission, accept all requests from mandate holders. Thank you.
Tiene la palabra Sri.
Thank you. Sri Lanka has the floor.
Mr. President, Sri Lanka extends welcome to the high-level delegation of Venezuela and appreciates the presentation made. We commend the progress made by Venezuela since its last UPR, including its remarkable achievements in upholding economic, social, and cultural rights amidst many challenges. We regret, however, that the continuation of unilateral policy measures on Venezuela has hampered and threatens to reverse many of the human development achievements made by the country. Whilst appreciating the progress already achieved, Sri Lanka recommends that Venezuela continues to implement national policies to strengthen equality and non-discrimination, especially of the most vulnerable groups, maintains efforts to reduce the number of families affected by extreme poverty due to economic barriers, and strengthens the Specialized Comprehensive Protection Unit to enhance protection to children and adolescents with disabilities. Thank you.
Thank you. There was a problem with the interpretation because the sound was not proper. Before I give the floor, please, I would very much appreciate if all delegations stick to the time the ones participating live for Zoom, because we have to be equitable with the ones that send their interventions by video. Los videos que pasan del tiempo.
The videos which run over the agreed time cannot be uploaded on the web. Therefore, I would be grateful if delegations who deliver their statements live via Zoom or in the room to also please abide by the 55-second time limit. I now give the floor to the State of Palestine.
Thank you, Mr. President. The State of Palestine welcomes the delegation of Venezuela, headed by Her Excellency Madame Delcy Rodriguez, to the third cycle of the UPR, and we thank them for the presentation for their national report. We welcome the efforts undertaken to improve the human rights situation in the country, and we would like to recommend the following. First, continue its efforts to improve access to essential services. Second, to continue its efforts to protect unaccompanied minors and to combat violence against them. Third, to continue its efforts to ensure the independence and impartiality of the judicial system, and we wish Venezuela a successful review. I thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. Sweden has the floor.
Suecia tiene la...
Sweden, you have the floor.
President, Sweden is gravely concerned about the human rights situation in Venezuela, particularly regarding arbitrary arrests, restrictions on the right to freedom of expression, and harassment of human rights defenders, and would like to make the following recommendations. 1. Ensure that the state institutions are not used to persecute political opponents, journalists, and other media workers, union leaders, or other perceived opponents of the government. 2. End the systematic repression of and ensure the protection of human rights defenders, including environmental defenders, by revising repressive legislation. 3. Ensure the effective implementation of the law on women's rights to a life free from violence in all areas, including through the adoption of a national action plan for protecting women and preventing violence against women. I thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you. Switzerland has the floor. President, Switzerland would like to welcome the delegation of Venezuela. We thank the delegation for the presentation. Despite certain progress, major challenges remain as regards the holding of free and transparent elections, the independence of the judiciary, as well as the space given to civil society, and there's prison overcrowding. Switzerland has 3 recommendations for Venezuela. 1, to strengthen the independence of courts by giving them the necessary resources and by reforming the practice of free nomination and dismissal of judges and prosecutors. Secondly, to repeal the illegal administrative regulations that threaten the proper functioning of civil society organisations, such as Administrative Decision 002/2011, and to refrain from issuing new ones. Thirdly, to drastically reduce the use of temporary detention or pre-trial detention, and to put an end to arbitrary detentions and ratify the optional protocol to Convention Against Torture. Thank you. I now give the floor to the Syrian Arab Republic. Present in the room, Ambassador, you have the floor. Micro.
The Syrian Arab Republic welcomes the delegation.
Micrófono para la...
Microphone, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Syrian Arab Republic welcomes the delegation of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, headed by Her Excellency Mrs. Delcy Rodriguez, Vice President of the Republic, and commend the national report and the progress in implementing the recommendations of the previous session and Venezuela's efforts in achieving economic and social development. Syria calls for the immediate lifting of immoral unilateral coercive measures imposed on Venezuela, demands to stop interference in its internal affairs and to respect its sovereignty and the choice of its people. We recommend the following. First, continue the policies of confronting economic aggressions and documenting unilateral coercive measures. Secondly, continue to develop social protection mechanisms for people through monthly subsidy systems to confront the economic war and coercive unilateral measures. And we wish Venezuela a successful UPR review. And thank you, Mr. President.
Gracias.
Thank you. Thailand has the floor.
Mr. President, Thailand acknowledged the progress made by Venezuela in implementing the recommendation from the previous UPR cycle. We welcome the measure taken by Venezuela to address the COVID-19 pandemic and mitigate its impact on the peoples with advice and technical assistance from the WHO and international partners. In addition to various undertakings to prevent human trafficking, Thailand recommends Venezuela to strengthen its efforts in combating trafficking in persons, in particular women, children, and Venezuelan migrants, and effectively implementing the national plan to combat trafficking in persons. Thailand also recommends Venezuela to continue its efforts to promote and protect human rights of its peoples by further strengthening coordination between relevant institutions and expanding channels of communication with civil society. Thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you. Timor-Leste now has the floor.
Timor-Leste por Zoom.
Timor-Leste via Zoom, please.
Unmute yourself, please. Está muteada. Timor-Leste, could you unmute yourself, please? We can hear you. Okay, we will move and come back to Timor-Leste when we solve the technical glitch. Le doy la palabra a...
I now give the floor to Togo. President, my delegation wishes a warm welcome to the Delegation of Venezuela for this third cycle of the UPR. We encourage the Venezuelan authorities to continue to build on progress made in terms of protecting and promoting human rights. In a constructive spirit, Togo has the following recommendations. 1. To ratify the optional protocol to the Convention Against Torture and Other Cruel, Inhumane or Degrading Treatment or Punishments. Secondly, to adopt all necessary measures to bring the People's Ombudsperson's Office more into conformity with the Paris Principles. Togo wishes every success to the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela in terms of the implementation of recommendations under this review. Thank you. Thank you. I now give the floor to Turkey.
Mr. President, we welcome the delegation of Venezuela and thank them for their presentation. We welcome the efforts undertaken by the Venezuelan government to reform the justice and penal system and to investigate alleged human rights violations by public officers. We also recognize Venezuela's efforts and initiatives in the areas of poverty reduction, right to health, right to education, as well as women's political and public representation. We recommend Venezuela to continue with the dialogue process initiated in Mexico under the facilitation of Norway in order to guarantee the constitutional rights of Venezuelan citizens. Continue its efforts to guarantee effective enjoyment of economic and social rights. Continue the dialogue and cooperation with the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights and other UN bodies. We wish Venezuela every success in its third UPR. Thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you. Ukraine now has the floor.
Mr. President, Ukraine thanks Venezuela for its national report. Among the positives, we wish to note the establishment of the OHCHR presence in the country, which we hope will contribute to resolving serious human rights challenges it faces. In order to also contribute to this process, Ukraine recommends to duly investigate all allegations of excessive use of force by security forces, arbitrary detentions, extrajudicial executions, torture, and other grave violations of human rights. To provide enabling democratic environment for activities of political opposition, journalists, and human rights defenders. To take all the necessary steps to ensure free and fair electoral process. To ratify the CATOP and CED. To extend standing invitation to all HRC special procedures. And to ensure independence of the NHRI and its acquisition of the highest accreditation status. I thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you. The United Arab Emirates has the floor. President, I'd like to welcome the delegation of Venezuela, and we commend them on their participatory process that underpinned the preparation of the report. The report highlights the progress achieved by Venezuela in all fields of human rights. It also shows efforts made at the social, economic, and cultural levels, as well as in terms of providing assistance to those most vulnerable, such as persons with disabilities. Our recommendations are, firstly, to continue implementing policies and measures aimed at ensuring the full exercise of rights by persons with disabilities and their full integration into society. Secondly, to provide training in order to build the skills of teaching staff who work with children with disabilities, for instance, by providing them with training in Venezuelan Sign Language, Braille, and other forms of support. Thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the United Kingdom.
The United Kingdom welcomes the arrival of the OHCHR and other UN actors in Venezuela. We are deeply concerned by their reports, including on the use of the justice system to undermine democracy. We urge Venezuela to allow unhindered humanitarian access. We recommend Venezuela, 1. Take urgent steps to end forced labour, sexual exploitation and human trafficking in the Arca Minera del Orinoco. 2. Ensure sexual and reproductive health and rights for all. including maternal and newborn health care and safe abortions. 3. Respect political parties' independence, lift arbitrary disqualifications of dissident leaders, and cease to override Venezuelans' will through court decisions. Thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the United Republic of Tanzania.
Thank you, Mr. President. The United Republic of Tanzania congratulates the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela for the comprehensive national report. We congratulate the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela for the measures taken to stimulate sustainable economic growth and for continued investment in education. The United Republic of Tanzania wishes to commend the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela for implementation of various initiatives, including the adoption of national and sectoral policies and programs, which have been undertaken to implement the recommendations accepted during the last Universal Periodic Review. We recommend your government continue efforts made to reduce poverty and inequality through the provision of quality education and improved social programs. We also encourage your government to implement the remaining recommendations. The United Republic of Tanzania wishes the delegation of the Bolivarian Republic a successful Universal Periodic Review. I thank you, Mr. President.
Gracias.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the United States of America.
The United States is extremely concerned by the Maduro regime's abuses against the Venezuelan people. We recommend Venezuela...
Point of order from the delegation of Venezuela. The delegation of Venezuela has the floor. Thank you, President. My delegation regrets that we have to intervene through a point of order due to the disrespectful allegations made by the delegation currently currently has the floor against my country. This runs counter to the principles that guide the work of the UPR, as they, of course, refer to the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela with disrespectful terms, which violates the decency that should be observed in the United Nations. This process, which is based on respectful dialogue on an equal footing between all states, is such that the official designations of UN member states should be respected. Therefore, President, my delegation would like you to call the current speaker to order and demand that they refrain from using unacceptable terms against my country. We also would like to ask that in the report of the UPR, none of these disrespectful mentions should appear, as they violate the standards established by the United Nations. Finally, President, we regret that delegations such as this one, which uses these hostile terms against my country, have a clear intention of undermining the UPR process and multilateralism, and therefore we would like to reiterate our firm condemnation of this. Thank you. I thank the delegation of Venezuela. I would like to remind you, firstly, that all delegations are entitled to make comments and observations and to express their views on human rights issues in their statements. Similarly, the state under review also has the right to voice its opinions. That said, I hope that all positions and opinions are expressed in a respectful and dignified manner. As regards this particular point of order, let me recall that as a subsidiary body to the UN General Assembly, the Human Rights Council adheres to the position and terminology, the official terminology of the United Nations as reflected in the relevant resolutions of the General Assembly and the Security Council. Therefore, I would like to instruct the Secretary to make sure that official terminology is respected when preparing the final report of this UPR. Now I will give the floor back to the United States of America.
Hold accountable all Maduro regime operatives, agents, and members of security forces or pro-regime armed groups who are responsible for human rights violations or abuses.
Punto de orden de la delegación de...
Point of order from Venezuela. You have the floor. Thank you, President. We regret that we have to take the floor again, but we once again note the use of improper terminology by the delegation currently taking the floor. We would like to once again ask you to call for order and decorum, and we thank you for your understanding and kindness in the face of this clear demand from Venezuela. Thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you. I give the delegation to the Ambassador of Cuba on this point of order. Thank you, President. My apologies for taking the floor. The situation here is clear. The delegation whose video is being shown is using improper terminology, which is not appropriate for the United Nations. What is happening? We are watching a video, and it's clear that the representative of the country in question cannot change the video right now. So we have to take a decision. Do we continue to show the video all the way to the end with all this improper language, or do we cut it and ask the delegation to then send a written statement with proper UN decent terminology? Thank you. Thank you very much to the distinguished ambassador. I give the floor to the Ambassador of Venezuela again on this point of order. Thank you, President. We would like to, first of all, thank our brotherly delegate of Cuba for the support expressed. We do remain convinced that the world needs to witness how disrespectful the United States is. And so, therefore, we would like you to please call on them to show the appropriate level of decorum for this forum and the United Nations. Such attitudes and the modalities that we are witnessing are such that we need the world to witness the lack of respect shown by the United States vis-a-vis Venezuela. Every time Venezuela has to take the floor to defend its decorum and dignity, we will have to do so. But we would like to highlight which state is straying from decorum and international standards here. Thank you. Thank you very much, Ambassador. I would like to confirm the decision I took a few moments ago on this point. The right of the delegation of Venezuela to require that the official UN terminology be used in the final report of this UPR cycle will be guaranteed. That is my decision, and I have asked the Secretariat to make sure that it does use official terminology when drafting the final report of this UPR. Therefore, that right is guaranteed. My decision now is that we continue showing the video until it ends. Thank you.
Involving unlawful killings, forced disappearances, torture, and other physical and sexual abuse by initiating investigations into credible allegations in the next 6 months. Release all political prisoners immediately and unconditionally, and take immediate steps to end arbitrary arrest and detention. And end immediately all undue interference with freedoms of expression, religion, association, and peaceful assembly. Allow all independent media, religious institutions, civil society organizations, and humanitarian organizations to operate without undue restrictions or threats.
Gracias.
Thank you. I now give the floor to Uruguay. Uruguay would like to express its grave concern at the humanitarian situation and human rights situation in Venezuela. Our recommendations: 1, to swiftly return to the inter-American system of human rights. 2, to accept the swift establishment on its territory of an office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights with sufficient staff and without any form of restriction of access and with security guarantees. 3, to take urgent measures to ensure the full respect of the rights to freedom of expression and freedom of the media. 4, to repeal restrictive legislation that criminalizes the work of human rights defenders. And 5th, to stop meddling in the work of universities and other higher education establishments, and to transform without delay the parallel system of non-autonomous universities to ensure that they achieve full independence and academic freedom. Thank you very much. I now give the floor to Uzbekistan.
Creo que presente en la sala.
I believe they are present in the room. Uzbekistan, you have the floor.
Está el cartel, pero no veo.
Well, I can see the nameplate, but not the delegate.
Bueno.
Let us move on. And if the delegate of Uzbekistan returns, they will be given the floor. I now give the floor to Vietnam.
Mr. President, Vietnam warmly welcomes the delegation of Venezuela and thanks them for their national UPR report. We appreciate various measures taken by Venezuela to implement recommendations since the adoption of its second UPR report, despite the challenging socio-economic situation in the country. In the spirit of constructive engagement, my delegation proposes two recommendations to Venezuela. One, continue to expand its legal framework for the promotion and protection of human rights, the rights of women, especially with regard to gender-based violence. Two, continue the cooperation with United Nations human rights mechanisms and treaty bodies. In conclusion, we wish the delegation of Venezuela a very successful UPR process. I thank you, Mr. President.
Gracias.
Thank you. Yemen has the floor.
Mr. President, we welcome the high-profile delegation of Venezuela and express our appreciation of the achievements made by the government in spite of staggering challenges facing it. Venezuela cooperated with the Human Rights Council and other UN mechanisms. And as a member of the Council, Venezuela continued supporting initiatives to reinforce and promote human rights.
I apologize. There is an interpretation. There was interpretation. The interpreters believe.
Sí. Podemos comenzar. Por favor, si podemos.
Please, could we replay the video by the delegation of Yemen so that we can listen to it with interpretation?
Ahora sí, Yemen, por favor.
Thank you, Mr. President, and welcome the high-profile delegation of Venezuela, and we express our appreciation of achievements of the government in the field of human rights in spite of challenges. Venezuela cooperated with the Human Rights Council and other UN human rights mechanisms. As a member of the Council, Venezuela continued its support for efforts to reinforce and protect human rights and committed firmly to the principles of objectivity, neutrality, non-selectivity, and non-politicization, as well as constructive dialogue. We commend the government of Venezuela and recommend their efforts to continue the preservation of peace and reinforcing national reconciliation in favor of human rights, and wish Venezuela a successful UPR review. And thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. Zimbabwe has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Zimbabwe welcomes and thanks the delegation of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela for its national report. We note that during the period under review, the country continued to pursue its main public policy objectives to combat inequality and reduce poverty, in spite of the negative effects of the unilateral coercive measures that have been imposed on the country. The country also submitted periodic reports to the treaty bodies that monitor progress in respect of persons with disabilities, migrant workers, women, children, and racial discrimination. We recommend that Venezuela strengthens ongoing programs designed to reduce poverty and improve the living standards of vulnerable and marginalized groups in society. I thank you, Mr. President.
Gracias.
Thank you. Algeria has the floor.
Monsieur le Président.
President, the delegation of Algeria would like to wish a warm welcome to the delegation of Venezuela, whom we thank for the presentation of the report. Algeria recognizes the efforts made by the government of Venezuela to overcome the difficult socio-economic situation, which has had an impact on the country's ability to achieve the desired progress in terms of protecting and promoting human rights. In a constructive spirit, my delegation has the following recommendations to make. One, to better guarantee human rights, especially those of more vulnerable the most vulnerable groups, in particular through effective public policies. Secondly, to continue cooperating with the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights and to continue technical assistance as well, and with other international agencies to strengthen the promotion of these fundamental rights. Thirdly, to combat violence against women and girls through coordinated and comprehensive preventive measures and ensure access to justice. Thank you very much. Thank you. I will now give the floor back to the delegation of Venezuela so that they might respond to the comments that have been made so far.
Su Excelencia tiene la palabra.
Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you. Well, we echo our ambassador's words and speak out against the violation of human rights and the continued aggression against Venezuela. Aggressor countries, the United States, the author of the unilateral coercive measures, cannot come here as judge and jury of our country and our government. In the case of the UK, where the Bank of England has legitimately held the gold, the Venezuelan gold, I think that's something that needs to be reviewed, particularly in light of the unilateral coercive measures. The voice of all needs to be the removal of these unilateral coercive measures on those countries victims of these illicit, punishing, illegal sanctions that have been transformed into a weapon of mass destruction against the whole system. We hear the recommendations respectfully made to our country as part of our UPR. Rest assured that we will continue to review these recommendations and consider their inclusion. But we'd like to express our gratitude to those countries who, in goodwill, have put recommendations to Venezuela, always with the understanding that the meaning for a country or a people to be subjected to a blockade of the dimension that Venezuela has known. This has been unprecedented in the history of our republic and in the modern world. One of the most aggressive, focused embargoes that we've seen. So we'd insist that the behavior of hegemonic countries from the north needs to be aligned. We are flying the flag of self-determination, sovereignty and independence. They try to blackmail us through these calls for a change of regime, through economic war, economic conflict, without really taking a human rights stance for and bearing in mind the effect of on the people. Education, housing, employment, sport, women and gender equality, indigenous issues, science and technology, municipal areas and social movements, and other connected issues. This body is connected to the system for missions and major missions that is geared to guaranteeing social protection to the population. This is a priority policy of the Bolivarian government. Venezuela is implementing the organic law connected to sustainable development and the social sphere, and its plans and projects are connected to this to provide response to the goals established. We also have 1,075,987 square kilometres with 33,360,238 million inhabitants, 24 states, 335 municipal areas and 49,000 local communities. On healthcare, our government places priority on the policy of protecting healthcare with 13,617 clinics, 579 comprehensive community healthcare areas, a territorial form for providing public policy directed health, 572 comprehensive diagnostic centres, 586 comprehensive rehabilitation rooms, 35 high technology centres and 421 outpatient clinics, and 294 hospitals. Over the course of the last year, there were 8,201,099 medical consultations and 191,403 surgical operations. The state has made an effort to keep healthcare free of charge, even under the force of the unilateral coercive measures. Over 2018 to 2020, we opened 304 community-based pharmacies where we provided medicines free of charge. Over the course of 2018 to 2020, there were 616,757,235 medical units provided and inputs as part of the vaccination program, and we provided 12,914,159 doses to protect our children against 11 different illnesses. On COVID-19, 95% of the Venezuelan population is now vaccinated against this virus. Just last year, we saw that we had a very low level. We have a high level of recovery. We've managed to do this through the policy implemented by the government of Nicolás Maduro, in addition to the recommendation of use even before the appearance of the first cases. We've been dealing case by case. Sexual and reproductive health and teenage pregnancy. Another negative impact of the unilateral coercive measures has been in the area of sexual and reproductive health. There's been a reduction in availability of female contraception. This largely affects Venezuelan women of fertile age. In spite of this, the state has managed to reduce maternal mortality by 11.5%, and the rate of child mortality is still at 10.3 per 1,000 live births. As to HIV, AIDS, and other sexually transmitted infections, in June 2018, the master plan for strengthening the response to HIV, TB, and malaria was established. This helped us to gain resources from the Global Fund, and these were used to buy antiretroviral therapy. The Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela has laboratories in place for free screening of HIV antibodies. On food, the unilateral coercive measures has led to a 88.7% reduction in food importation and import of foodstuffs, and in 2016 we established the program for local committees for supply and production. This with a view to providing access to healthy foods. And more than 30,000 committees, the program of which is to provide a monthly basket of non-perishable foods with the subsidy of 99% of the value to 7,600,000 families. From 2016 to 2021, we distributed 7,518,861 metric tons on a national level, and last year we distributed 132,345,632 food baskets. On education, Venezuela has education as a constitutional right, and we have seen a gradual increase in investment. For 2020 to 2021, we have 29,103 schools. 84% are public and free. 93% of these schools have the food program in place, which guarantees at least 2 daily meals, covering 5,290,392 students on a national level in 2021. From 2019 to 2021, we distributed more than 15,849,454 books of 200 different kinds, 4,403,427 equipment kits, 4,403,427 kits for shoes, and 3 million kits of textiles to students in basic education with the need to try to ensure their continued schooling. On university, the national system guarantees access to any Venezuelan with the appropriate criteria. From 2016 to 2021, more than 4 million students, undergrad and postgrad students, were given scholarships through the scholarship system. With the University from Home program, as part of the pandemic, in 2021, there were 3,145,869 university students in 98 different institutions. And we would like to highlight that as part of the QS ranking of Latin American universities, there were 5 of the Venezuelan universities that were ranked as the most prestigious in the region. Since we are committed to the protection of the rights of our population, the reduction of poverty, we created in 2017 the Carne de la Patria system. This is a special card, a mechanism that helps us to ensure the efficiency and coverage of our social protection programs. For 2018, we're activating our economic prosperity and growth recovery plan. In 2019, the plan Love in Action for victims of the economic blockade in order to mitigate the effects of the sanctions, which reached a number of 1,431,902 persons during the last year. And in 2020, we adopted the constitutional anti-blockade law in order to see the national development and guarantee of human rights. The goal of this is to establish a normative framework to provide the Venezuelan state with the legal tools to try to counter-effect the harmful effects of the blockade. We've distributed resources for social protection to more than 6,200,000 homes through the grand mission for households in the country. And we've also, through the Great Mission for Youth Jobs, helped to provide protection to 2.1 million young people registered from 2018. On reaching the indigenous communities, we should mention that our policy for the indigenous communities since 2016 to 2021, the local indigenous councils have been put together to guarantee sustainable social policy for our indigenous communities, and they benefited from this reached more than 300,000 persons. And then last year we included 61,364 persons. Moving on to the right to housing. We included in the period 2016-2021 more than 2.8 million houses as part of the Great Housing Mission of Venezuela. This is a social program that benefits 1,450,446 people in 24 federal areas, reaching the historic landmark of 3,900,000 houses since 2011. Our goal is to reach 5 million houses by 2024, this to try to reach the families on lowest income. As part of our labour policy from 2016 to 2021, we've managed to certify 1,109 collective labour agreements and various agreements to benefit more than 16,985,312 workers. On our policy for local areas and social movements, we have impacted more than 13,457,238 inhabitants. Turning to sport, Venezuela, as part of the Tokyo Olympics, Venezuela managed to come up with 4 medals, 1 gold and 3 silver. We have the policy Barrio Adentro Deportivo, where we're trying to reach an annual average of 5 million persons between 2005 and 2021, and to ensure that we emphasize how sport is good for health. I thank you.
Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you, Vice President. It's important to highlight the current position of Venezuelan women. Since the arrival of the Bolivarian Revolution, we have seen the establishment of a number of public policies in the social and economic sphere, which has allowed them to be included and recognized. These state policies have been bolstered by President Nicolas Maduro. These include the Agenda for Women and Gender Equality 2019 to 2025. This will be the continuation of the Plan for Equality and Gender Equity Mama Rosa 2013 to 2019. In 2019, the index for gender development was 1,013. We have one of the highest levels of equality. On political participation for 2021, 56.77% of the municipal councils and communal areas were made up of women. There are 44,637 women who are heads of the local committees for supply and production, 79% led by women. In keeping with the UNESCO Statistics Institute, Venezuela is the first country in Latin America with 60% of women participating in the science sector. In addition, our country is one of 3 countries in the world with the highest levels of women researchers. Turning to social protection and combating poverty, we established the great mission Hogares de la Patria, households of the country, that protects more than 6,200,000 families. Out of a total of houses built by the Gran Misión Vivienda, 80.46% were led by women who are heads of households. Since 2017, we established that 45% of the loan portfolio of the public bank is geared to women. Also, we implemented the program Mujeres Conuqueras, which grants 2,091 land titles to women farmers. In 2017, we began the implementation of the National Plan for Human Birth and Breastfeeding. To date, we have trained a total of 18,101 advocates for this plan that help to provide support to pregnant women. It's important to highlight that these women are protected through the social system, giving them monthly benefits. Family planning services also provide outpatient care and hospital care in the country. As part of the national strategies, we established the National Plan for Prevention and Reduction of Early Pregnancy. We also established the first national plan with units to provide information on sexual and reproductive rights. On gender justice, we adopted the second reform of the organic law on the women's rights to a life free of violence, which includes 5 different forms of gender-based violence, for a total of 25, including violence through information policy, gynecological violence, and various other kinds of violence. We also have a hotline, 0800 Women, to provide guidance and protection in the justice system to women who are suffering from violence. It's important to highlight that this service was re-established in 2020. It was inactive in 2019 because of an electrical sabotage that our country was subjected to. During this period, we recorded an increase in the strength of courts and specialized prosecutors in violence against women across the country. To guarantee the participation of the sexually diverse community, we established the Presidential Council on Sexual Diversity. It has decision-making power in the executive. We manifest our commitment to cementing necessary actions to reach equality for women and girls. And we also endorse the efforts to sustain the social protection system that have helped us to bear any attempts against Venezuela. Thank you very much. I'll give the floor back to the President of the Human Rights Council, Mr. Federico Villegas, to continue the interactive dialogue. Thank you, Excellencies. I now give the floor to the delegation of Angola.
Mr. President, Angola welcomes the delegation of Venezuela to this third cycle, despite the national challenging political, economic, and social context. Angola values Venezuela's efforts in strengthening human rights institutions, as well as its constructive approach with Human Rights Council mechanisms. Angola recommends the following: to ratify the 1954 Convention relating to the status of stateless persons and the 1961 Convention on Reduction of Statelessness, to take specific measures to protect women and children against human trafficking, to take practical measures to improve food security in local communities. I thank you, Mr. President.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you. Argentina has the floor, please. We welcome the delegation of Venezuela and thank it for the presentation of its report. Argentina recommends that Venezuela, 1, fully cooperate with the Human Rights Council and all its mechanisms, including the relevant special procedures, and fully implement the recommendations made by the OHCHR in its reports. 2, cement the call from the High Commissioner that it pursue swift, exhaustive, independent, impartial and transparent investigations on allegations of violations of human rights. And they bring perpetrators to justice and guarantee appropriate remedy for victims. 3, strengthen the existing cooperation with the Office of the High Commissioner, establishing a permanent office in the country equipped with appropriate human resources and give it the opportunity to develop its tasks appropriately. And 4, ratify the International Convention for the Protection of All Persons Against Enforced Disappearances. Thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you. Australia has the floor, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. Australia recommends that Venezuela: 1, cooperate with international human rights instruments and mechanisms, including supporting regular and unrestricted UN Special Procedures visits. 2, release persons detained or arrested for political reasons and refrain from and prevent violence and retaliatory action. 3, work with humanitarian organisations to design and implement a principled national plan addressing the ongoing humanitarian emergency, prioritising groups in vulnerable situations. 4, fully respect democracy, including by ensuring the separation of powers, due process, respect for human rights, and a safe and enabling environment for civil society groups. 5, undertake independent, thorough and prompt investigations into all cases of human rights violations and ensure perpetrators are held accountable.
Gracias.
Thank you. I give the floor to Austria, please.
Gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Welcomes the delegation of Venezuela to the UPR and thanks them for the report. Austria is deeply concerned about reports of widespread and systematic human rights violations, as well as the gradual breakdown of democratic institutions and the rule of law. We therefore recommend immediately and unconditionally release all political prisoners and conduct thorough and credible reforms of the police and judiciary, and in particular of the Special Action Forces. 2, undertake independent, thorough and prompt investigations into all cases of human rights violations, particularly extrajudicial killings, attacks against journalists and human rights defenders, and bring perpetrators to justice. 3, ensure media freedom by bringing national legislation in line with Venezuela's constitution and international standards, and reinstate all media outlets that have unwarrantedly been closed. 4, cooperate with OHCHR to establish a fully fledged country office in Venezuela. I thank you.
Thank you. Tiene la palabra.
I give the floor to Azerbaijan, please.
Mr. President, Azerbaijan warmly welcomes the friendly delegation of Venezuela and thanks for presentation of the national report. We commend the measures taken by the government of Venezuela in promoting and protecting human rights and its extensive cooperation with UN human rights bodies, in particular with the OHCHR. The steps aimed at guaranteeing civil and political rights in the country, such as the establishment of the National Office for the Comprehensive Care of Victims of Violence, serve to better addressing violations, as well as render support to prevention mechanisms. We offer the following recommendations to Venezuela. First, continue efforts aimed at strengthening the independence and impartiality of the judiciary. Second, strengthen measures to stimulate sustainable economic growth by raising national productivity levels in the public and private sectors. Azerbaijan wishes Venezuela a very successful review. Thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you. I give the floor to Bahamas, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Bahamas thanks Venezuela for its national report presented and welcomes the engagement in this UPR process. In a constructive spirit, the Bahamas recommends that Venezuela, 1, takes effective measures to restore the independence of the justice system, 2, publishes the national budget to allow for public oversight, 3, takes all necessary measures to prevent acts of persecution and targeted repression, including based on political affiliation, and ensures that human rights defenders are protected without discrimination on any grounds, and 4, investigates allegations of discrimination in access to food assistance and other social protection programs, guarantees equal access to such programs, and makes transparent the criteria used to determine eligibility. We wish Venezuela every success in this UPR process. I thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you. I give the floor to Bahrain, please.
Mr. President, the Kingdom of Bahrain welcomes Her Excellency Dr. Delcy Rodriguez, Executive Vice President of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, and thanks her for her comprehensive presentation. In this regard, we offer the following recommendations. 1. Developing an institutional framework dedicated to reinforcing the existing efforts to eradicate violence against women and children. 2. Accelerate efforts to establish legal framework to reduce maternal mortality. Finally, the Kingdom of Bahrain wishes the Bolivian Republic of Venezuela a successful review. I thank you, Mr. President.
Gracias.
Thank you. I give the floor to Bangladesh, please.
Mr. President, Bangladesh welcomes the distinguished delegation of Venezuela and thanks for presenting its national report. We recognize its efforts to combat poverty, strengthen healthcare, and improve access to food. Bangladesh recommends Venezuela to continue to strengthen public policies to eradicate extreme poverty, including addressing the challenges posed by the COVID-19 pandemic. Continue to develop people's living conditions, including improved access to electricity, safe drinking water, and sanitation. And continue efforts to improve the quality of education at every level. We wish Venezuela a successful review. I thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you. Barbados has the floor, please.
Mr. President, Barbados welcomes the delegation of Venezuela and appreciates the national report and updates provided. We recognize the commitment of the government of Venezuela to protecting the rights of the people, as demonstrated in efforts to combat inequality and reduce poverty. Barbados recommends that Venezuela, 1, continue to strengthen national mechanisms for follow-up and implementation of international human rights recommendations through broad-based consultation processes that are accessible to all. And 2, continue to develop policies and programs that protect the rights of children and adolescents. We wish Venezuela a successful review. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Tiene la palabra.
Belarus has the floor.
Belarus has the floor. We welcome the delegation of Friendly Venezuela and we thank them for the presentation of the national report. We would like to also note the progress made in implementing the recommendations from previous UPR cycles. We give due credit to this work, which has been carried out in difficult conditions given the foreign pressure and unlawful unilateral sanctions. We are grateful to Venezuela for its active, constructive and virtuous role as a Council member. We have the following recommendations to make. 1, to take further steps to improve the level of well-being and social protection of the population. 2, to continue to constructively cooperate with the HRC special procedures, especially the special procedure on the negative impact of unilateral coercive measures on the enjoyment of human rights. And thirdly, to present its new and modern electoral system to the international community as a positive experience of political participation. We wish Venezuela a successful UPR. Thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you. Belgium, please.
Mr. President, as highlighted in the report of the Independent International Fact-Finding Mission, the human rights situation in Venezuela remains deeply concerning. Therefore, Belgium recommends Venezuela to 1. Take effective measures to restore the independence of the judiciary and ensure the impartiality of the Office of the Attorney General and the Ombudsperson. 2. Immediately and impartially investigate all instances of extrajudicial killing and excessive use of force by security forces, including in the context of protests. 3. Refrain from attacks and arbitrary arrests of people, especially journalists, exercising their right to freedom of expression, and end impunity in the case of violations of this right. Thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you. The distinguished delegation of Bolivia has the floor. The ambassador is here in the room. Thank you. We welcome the brother delegation of Venezuela and thank them for the presentation of the report. We are grateful for the participative process led by Venezuela for drafting the third periodic report, which is the participation of social organizations of movements and technical support from the OHCHR. We highlight the effort of the Venezuelan people in spite of the negative effects of the unilateral course of measures and systematic attacks and the pandemic. Bolivia would respectfully put the following recommendations to Venezuela: to continue promoting and supporting the work of social organizations of movements, to continue cooperating and strengthening regional organizations and the promotion and protection of human rights, to continue the efforts for the judiciary with the aim to clarify the facts that occurred between 2017 and 2021, particularly violations of human rights, and to continue the implementation of intercultural schools on a national level to provide intercultural bilingual education to students, taking into account the cultural specificities of each indigenous people group. We wish the best of success. Thank you. Thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you very much. I would like to ask all delegations to stick to the time allotted to each speaker. I give the floor to Botswana.
We welcome the delegation of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela to the third cycle of the UPR process. Botswana notes efforts made in addressing human rights violations in Venezuela. The establishment of mobile courts and implementation of virtual offices systems by the Venezuelan judiciary to address human rights abuses in the midst of COVID-19 pandemic is commendable. Cognizant of Venezuela's observation that unilateral coercive measures had a negative impact on the enjoyment of human rights by the Venezuelan people, we are, however, concerned about continuation of disproportionate use of force and arbitrary detention of protesters. Botswana therefore recommends that Venezuela, 1, expedites investigations and criminal proceedings on the remaining cases of deaths and in the context of protests. 2, ensure due process for persons arbitrarily detained in government facilities. We wish Venezuela a successful UPR outcome. I thank you, Mr. President.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. I now give the floor to Brazil. Thank you, President. Brazil is concerned by the deterioration of human rights in Venezuela. We note the efforts to cooperate with the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. However, there are multiple challenges that remain to ensuring the effective accountability of perpetrators and justice for victims. Brazil recommends to Venezuela, firstly, to cooperate fully with the fact-finding mission, including providing it unhindered access to its territory in accordance with its obligations as a member of the Human Rights Council. Secondly, to ensure all conditions for holding free, fair, peaceful, independent elections with a view to restoring democracy in the country. And thirdly, to reform the judiciary system in order to ensure the independence and impartiality of judges and prosecutors and to restore the rule of law. Brazil would like to reiterate its commitment to providing humanitarian assistance to the Venezuelan people, and we are in favour of an inclusive and negotiated political solution for the restoration of democracy. Thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you. Brunei Darussalam has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Brunei Darussalam thanks the Bolivian Republic of Venezuela for the presentation of their national report. Brunei Darussalam recognizes the achievements of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela in socio-economic areas such as education and health in spite of the ongoing challenges of the COVID-19 pandemic. In particular, we commend the country's efforts towards ensuring access to university-level education, including persons with disabilities. In this regard, we propose 2 recommendations. 1, to to continue to provide resources and develop strategies for the achievement of greater access to higher education, especially for persons with disabilities, and 2, to carry on stepping up efforts to ensure that its citizens fully enjoy good health, including mental health and access to healthcare and support. Mr. President, Venezuela wishes the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela a successful conclusion of this UPR session.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you. I now give the floor to Bulgaria.
President, Bulgaria welcomes the delegation of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. We acknowledge that since the second UPR, the country has received 2 visits for special procedures, as well as a visit by the High Commissioner. However, we recognize that there remain significant challenges and restrictions to the civic and democratic space. Reports indicate a serious deterioration of the human rights situation in Venezuela, while the country is facing a severe humanitarian emergency. Bulgaria would like to make the following recommendations. First, protect and promote freedom of expression, ensure the safety of journalists, and respond to alleged violations. 2, strengthen institutions and mechanisms for the protection of unaccompanied minors, and combat all forms of violence, exploitation, and abuse against them. Thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you. Burkina Faso has the floor. Thank you. Burkina Faso welcomes the delegation of Venezuela. We thank them for the presentation of the national report under this 3rd UPR cycle. Burkina Faso welcomes the progress made by Venezuela in implementing the recommendations accepted in 2016, especially as regards measures taken to fight against violence against women and to strengthen its cooperation with the Human Rights Council and its mechanisms. Burkina Faso encourages Venezuela to continue its efforts to tackle all challenges that remain in the field of human rights. Burkina Faso recommends the following. 1, to ratify the optional protocol to the Convention Against Torture and other cruel, inhumane or degrading treatments or punishments. 2, to step up its efforts to bring the National Human Rights Institution into conformity with the Paris Principles. We wish Venezuela every success in the UPR. Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you. I now give the floor to Burundi, who is present in the room. You have the floor, Burundi. Thank you, President. Burundi extends a warm welcome to the delegation of Venezuela. We thank them for the presentation of the national report. Burundi commends Venezuela on its peaceful system and for having established a law against hatred and any other act inciting hatred or intolerance. We also welcome the efforts to strengthen international humanitarian law and to respond to the negative impact of the unilateral coercive sanctions. We recommend to Venezuela to continue taking appropriate measures to strengthen the various institutions in charge of protecting and promoting human rights. Finally, Burundi would like to say that it is in favor of adopting the outcome document, and we wish Venezuela every success in implementing the recommendations it will accept. Thank you.
Merci. Tiene la palabra.
Thank you. Cambodia has the floor.
Mr. President, Cambodia recognizes the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela's extensive endeavors to continue to engage with the UN Human Rights Mechanism and special procedures. We also commend Venezuela's effort and achievement in addressing the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic upon most vulnerable groups. Its investment in the education system, universal health coverage, and health services delivery are also recognized. In the constructive spirit, Cambodia would like to put forward the following recommendations. First, continue to intensify the ongoing efforts toward inclusive economic growth and further poverty reductions. Second, continue endeavors to increase women participation in public affairs and economic development. Finally, I wish the delegation of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela every success in this exercise. I thank you.
Gracias. Tiene la palabra.
Thank you. Canada has the floor.
Canada remains gravely concerned by the increase in human rights violations and worsening humanitarian crisis. Venezuela must comply fully with the recommendations of the OHCHR and FFM and take into account those from Venezuelan civil society. Canada recommends that Venezuela 1. Combat impunity for violations and crimes, including extrajudicial executions, arbitrary detention, and torture, by examining responsibility and ensuring accountability at the highest levels of the chain of command. 2. Provide effective remedies to victims of human rights abuses and adopt urgent measures to address gender-based violence. 3. Address the presence of non-state armed groups and corruption linked to illicit gold mining in the Arco Minero and take action to stop human rights abuses reportedly taking place in the region. And 4, cease all harassment, criminalization, and persecution against journalists, human rights defenders, and CSOs, guaranteeing a safe and enabling environment for their work. Thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the delegation of Chile. The ambassador is in the room. You have the floor. President, we thank the delegation of Venezuela for the presentation of its national report. Our delegation respectfully makes the following recommendations. 1. To launch a process that will enable the holding of free, honest and credible elections with an independent National Electoral Council and an impartial Supreme Court ensuring the participation of the opposition. Secondly, to eradicate all forms of reprisals and persecution on political grounds. Thirdly, to ratify the International Convention Against Enforced Disappearances and OPCAT. Fourthly, to increase efforts to protect the rights of girls and women and to take urgent measures to eliminate all forms of violence against women and girls, especially those who are deprived of their liberty. 5, to broaden cooperation with the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights and to implement recommendations contained in its reports, as well as in the report of the Independent International Fact-Finding Mission. We hope that this UPR cycle will be a success for Venezuela. Thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Ambassador. I now give the floor to China.
Mr. President, the Chinese delegation appreciates the efforts and achievements that the Venezuelan government has made in promoting and protecting human rights. China welcomes the government's efforts to promote economic social development, combat the pandemic, and protect the rights of vulnerable groups. The unilateral coercive measures taken by the USA against Venezuela have seriously violated the human rights of Venezuelan people and should be lifted immediately. China wishes to make 3 recommendations. First, continue to promote sustainable economic and social development and improve people's living standards. Second, continue to work together with other countries affected by UCMs to reduce and eliminate the negative impacts of those measures. Third, continue to promote South-South cooperation in the joint effort to promote and protect human rights. China wishes Venezuela a complete success of its review. Thank you, Mr. President.
Gracias.
Thank you. I now give the floor to Colombia. Thank you, President. Colombia would like to draw the UPR working group's attention to the fact that the state of Venezuela does not cooperate with the UN human rights system. The independent international mission established by the Council to investigate serious human rights violations in Venezuela. My apologies, says the President. Could we please rerun the video with the images this time for Colombia's statement, Secretariat, please.
Pasamos a las...
Meanwhile, we will move on to the next speaker and then come back to Colombia. I give the floor to Congo. President, Congo congratulates the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela on the presentation of its national report. Among the actions undertaken to protect and promote human rights in Venezuela since the previous review, my country would like to highlight the implementation by Venezuela of 2 national human rights plans, and this despite a difficult context which has been exacerbated by the adverse effects of the unilateral coercive measures. In a constructive spirit, Congo has the following recommendations for Venezuela. 1, to step up efforts to fight against human trafficking, especially when it comes to women and children. 2, to take appropriate measures in order to restart food production. Finally, we would like to wish every success to Venezuela in this UPR exercise. Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you. I have been told that the video for Colombia's statement is not compatible with the software and equipment we have here, but that we can hear it. If the Venezuelan delegation agrees, we could play the Colombian video just with sound. But we will move on while we try to resolve the technical issues. Costa Rica now has the floor.
Puede ser entonces que
Maybe this is a technical issue on our side then with the videos. We will move on to Côte d'Ivoire. And then as soon as we have solved the technical problem, we will return to the other two delegations. Côte d'Ivoire, you have the floor. Thank you, President. Côte d'Ivoire would like to commend the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela on progress achieved in terms of protecting and promoting human rights. My delegation encourages the authorities of Venezuela to continue their efforts and would like to make the following recommendations. 1, to ratify the optional protocol to the Convention Against Torture and other cruel, inhumane, or degrading treatments or punishments. Secondly, to accede to the 1951 Convention on the Status of Refugees and to adopt a policy for protecting human rights defenders. To conclude, we wish them every success. Thank you. Thank you. As there is a technical problem that we are working on, we're resetting the video system. If we may, we will continue giving the floor to those delegations that do not require a video, namely those who are present on Zoom or in the room. And so we will give the floor to the distinguished ambassador of Cuba, who is here in the room. You have the floor, Ambassador. Thank you, President. I would like to extend an affectionate and revolutionary greeting to Venezuela. We recognize and commend the insignificant progress made by Venezuela to promote and protect human rights, and we also commend the government's commitment to its population's well-being. We recommend, 1, to continue defending the human rights of the Venezuelan people through legal actions at the national and international level in order to counter the unilateral coercive measures imposed by the United States and other countries. Secondly, to promote and strengthen legislative and political or public policy initiatives to combat the impact of unilateral coercive measures, and thirdly, to continue implementing public policies to ensure gender equality and the rights of the LGBTIQ+ communities. We would like to reiterate our firm and unconditional support and solidarity for the brotherly people and government of Venezuela. Thank you. Thank you very much, Ambassador.
Since there was a technical problem we're trying to fix, in the interests of time, we'll continue with the other delegations that are here in the room so that we can guarantee that they can take the floor while we try and fix the technical problem. So I will give the floor, therefore, to the delegation of Denmark, which is here in the room.
Mr. President, Denmark welcomes the delegation of Venezuela and commend the enhanced cooperation with the OHCHR. However, we are deeply concerned about the use of arbitrary killings and repressions of civil society and the democratic opposition with the aim of silencing critical voices. We also note with regret that impunity for human rights violations and crimes under international law is widespread. Denmark recommends Venezuela to fully respect freedom of expression and halt and prevent all acts of repression against members of the democratic opposition and civil society. 2, undertake independent investigations into all cases of human rights violations. 3, ratify the OPCAT. Denmark wishes Venezuela a successful review. I thank you.
Sí. Me informan.
I'm told that you'll have to reset the system, including the screen will have to be reset. Therefore, I wonder. Apparently, there's no sound either. Could we? We've been asked just to take a quick 2-minute break to reset the system. Sorry, we'll stop the clock obviously for the Venezuelan delegation because I see other delegations are in the. There are delegations in the room. We could go with. No, we can't. So I've been asked to just suspend very quickly so that we can reset the system, and then we need to, the Venezuelan the connection with Caracas needs to be repaired as well, because otherwise we won't be able to see the distinguished Vice President of Venezuela. So please, we're going to take a 2-minute suspension, which obviously we will stop the clock. Thank you.
Costa Rica agradece a la delegación de
Je vous remercie.
see.
Costa Rica agradece a la delegación de Costa Rica.
Mr. President, Croatia welcomes the delegation.
Sí, para explicar la situación, estamos intentando.
Just to brief you on the current situation, we are trying to fix the system, but at least for the time being, we could move forward and listen to a few videos. So we are going to give the floor now to two delegations, after which we will give the floor to the delegation of Venezuela once again. We still have a few issues with the video from Colombia, so we're going to postpone it a few minutes. But now I would like to give the floor to the delegation of Costa Rica, the Costa Rican ambassador, through a video message. We would like to thank Venezuela for their presentation and would like to present the following recommendations. First, to ratify the Convention Against Enforced Disappearances and the optional protocol of the Convention Against Torture. 2, to guarantee access to justice to all people, guaranteeing independence and impartiality of the judiciary in keeping with the international rules and standards, as well as to guarantee the independence and impartiality of the prosecutors in carrying out swift, efficient, and transparent investigations of all violations of human rights, including those perpetrated by security forces, so as to make justice prevail and offer victims the proper reparation. And lastly, to put an end to persecution and criminalization of human rights defenders, humanitarian workers, journalists, and civil society activists. Thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you. Croatia has the floor.
Por video.
Mr. President, Croatia welcomes the delegation of Venezuela and thanks them for the presentation of their report. We remain concerned with the suppression of civic and political rights, the reports of torture and ill treatment, enforced disappearances and arbitrary detentions, as well as the ongoing humanitarian crisis. Therefore, we have following recommendations. First, strengthen the National Commission for the Prevention of Torture and ratify the optional protocol on Convention against torture and other cruel, inhumane or degrading treatment. Second, take urgent measures to conduct exhaustive and impartial investigations on excessive use of force and ensure accountability for human rights violations committed by state actors. Third, adopt a national action plan on combating sexual and gender-based violence. We encourage the government to continue its cooperation with OHCHR in meeting the international human rights norms. Thank you.
Gracias, y ahora sí.
Thank you. And now I would like to give the floor to the delegation of Venezuela while thanking them for their indulgence. The Venezuelan delegation has the floor. Thank you, Mr. President. Well, addressing first a very specific point, first on the Brazilian statement, I would simply like to respond by providing figures. Brazil now is the epicenter of the COVID-19 pandemic in South America. It ranks third worldwide in the number of cases and of deceased, whereas Venezuela, with its model for the protection of the life and health of Venezuelans, ranks 76th. Here in this chart, you can see it quite clearly. While Brazil has 634 cases per 100,000 inhabitants, Venezuela has 76. Now, here we see the differences in the models. And we also see what it means when a group of satellite countries from the hegemony, they coalesced and came together to peddle lies about Venezuela. And I can say this because I have seen this myself through many statements. Some, not the majority, where they're simply reading a piece of paper and they do not even know what they're talking about because they are unfamiliar with the Venezuelan reality. Well, Mr. President, I wanted to give the floor to the Minister Felipe Plasencia, Executive Secretary of the National Human Rights Council, Dr. Laurie DeVoe, and to the Deputy of the National Assembly, Mr. Torralba, to continue this interactive dialogue.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Vice President. Venezuela, as part of multilateral and bilateral cooperation, takes on the promotion and protection of human rights as a cross-cutting point for the benefit of peoples, making available our successful experience in the fight against poverty, the eradication of illiteracy, education, and housing, among other areas. And it is with this mindset that our country has continued to promote integration and cooperation mechanisms throughout the region, such as the Community of Latin American and Caribbean States, ECLAC, the Union of South American Nations, UNASUR, the Bolivarian Alliance for People and by People of the Americas, as well as Petrocaribe. In addition, Venezuela broadly supports this Council and other human rights mechanisms of the United Nations. As a member of the Council, Venezuela has continued to promote initiatives to promote and protect human rights, with strict compliance with the principles of objectivity, impartiality, non-selectivity, lack of politicization, genuine dialogue, and cooperation. Venezuela contributes positively to the international community in promoting and protecting human rights. To that end, we have presented our candidature to be re-elected in the Human Rights Council in 2022. Between 2016 and 2021, Venezuela enshrined the corresponding report between treaty bodies, fulfilling its international obligations. With the technical support of the Office of the High Commissioner, we are making progress in the design of an ongoing mechanism to follow up on the implementation of the recommendations of human rights treaty bodies. And over the course of this third cycle, Venezuela was visited by two special procedures of the Council: the independent expert on the promotion of international democratic and equitable and fair order, as well as the special rapporteur on the negative impact of unilateral coercive measures in the enjoyment of human rights. Furthermore, we extended an invitation to the Special Rapporteur on the Right to Development to visit the country. In 2019, the High Commissioner of the United Nations carried out an official visit to the country. As a result of the visit in September 2019, Venezuela and the Office of the High Commissioner signed a letter of understanding so as to establish the presence of officials of the office in the country to develop a cooperation agenda and one of technical assistance. The letter of understanding was renewed in 2020 and in 2021. The civil servants of the office have visited 12 states, as well as 35 penitentiary centers, interviewing in a confidential mode over 400 people who had been deprived of liberty. Additionally, the office provides technical support to over 10 state institutions in 9 different areas of work, including strengthening the justice system, the legislative work of the National Assembly, created in January 2021, and the work of the Ombudsman and the National Commission for the Prevention of Torture. In October 2016, we signed an instrument for the ratification of the Convention of the International Convention on the Protection of All Migration Workers and their Family Members. In September 2019, Venezuela signed on to the instrument to accede to the Marrakesh Treaty and presented before the World Organization of Intellectual Property, WIPO, the corresponding instrument to fulfill this voluntary commitment. Our country believes that migration should be approached from a comprehensive human rights perspective, which is why we promote countries' commitments to guarantee the respect, the promotion, and the effective enjoyment of migrants and their families, regardless of their migration status, throughout every single stage of their migration transition. And it is with this spirit in mind that we created the plan Vuelta a la Patria, coming back to the homeland, so as to provide the means for the voluntary return of all nationals of the Venezuelan migration population, while protecting their rights when confronted with violence, xenophobia, and threats of exclusion, which have been expressed by many countries. Over 30,000 people have benefited from this plan, and over 340,000 have returned, crossing the border. Thank you. During this third UPR cycle, the National Council of Human Rights continued to develop actions so as to continue to strengthen the enjoyment of human rights, with the spearheading role of organizations and social movements, as well as the support of the United Nations system. The National Plan for Human Rights was implemented successfully in this third cycle. In 2016, we designed 545 indicators to follow up on it. The projects, actions, and necessary resources for its implementation were included in the respective operative plans of the state policies. In 2020, we carried out an inclusive investigation on the fulfillment of the national plan. We determined that 93% of the actions stipulated therein were either fully or partially implemented. With the support of UNICEF, we carried out an adaptation of the plan for boys, girls, and adolescents. Currently, we are working on designing the consultation of the second National Human Rights Plan with the technical assistance of the Office of the High Commissioner. The recommendations that will be accepted as a result of this UPR cycle shall be included in this new plan. As part of the National Human Rights Plan, the state institutions carried out over 1,200 training and capacity building activities aimed at civil servants, including the police officers and military staff, as well as justice system workers. In addition, the theme of human rights has been included as part of a continuous education in specialized centers training state civil servants. Approximately 168,000 people participate per annum in education activities in the area of human rights in these establishments. The Constitution asks the state to adopt measures and positive efforts to benefit people that are in conditions of vulnerability and exclusion. Through a legislative approach that is broad, Venezuela guarantees equalness and freedom from discrimination, creating institutions that design and implement public policies to ensure that this right prevails. In 2017, the president handed down the basic rules for actions of civil servants in the area of human rights, and in 2021, the National Assembly approved the law on this very subject. In keeping with these instruments, civil servants must abstain from carrying out any type of activity or behavior that discriminates based on any circumstance that might have as a goal or as a result to undermine the recognition or enjoyment of human rights. Venezuela continues to implement policies for integration for the victims of violations of human rights and of any type of political violence that may have transpired in the country. In August 2017, we created the Commission for Truth, Justice, Peace, and Public Calm, with the goal of investigating acts of violence on political grounds and to contribute to shedding light on truth and to guarantee proper care for victims. The Commission gave comprehensive reparation measures to 228 direct or indirect victims. In 2021, the National Assembly started a discussion on the law for the comprehensive integration and the reparation of victims. In addition, it created the Commission to guarantee justice and reparation for victims of crimes against human rights. Venezuela recognizes that this important contribution is carried out by civil society organizations as well as human rights defenders. One of the 5 main thrusts of the human rights plans was aimed at promoting the participation of all types of social organization in this area. In addition, the Federal Council of Human Rights has kept open for us for dialogue and ongoing communication with human rights defenders and organizations. Thank you. Thank you very much, Executive Vice President of the Republic. The legislative branch of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, through a body of the National Assembly, wishes to highlight in this third UPR, speaking on behalf of its board and its president, its chair, Deputy Jorge Rodriguez Gomez, we would like to highlight 2 points that we believe are quite germane. The first one relates to social dialogue. The main goal of the Commission, which was created for peace, dialogue, and national reconciliation, has been to meet with every sector of civil society. Our Commission has thus held several meetings with political parties, with both public and private media outlets, with women's movements and groups representing gender diversity, with businessmen, with employers, workers, with trade union organizations, with various religious groups that operate peacefully in our country: Catholics, evangelics, Muslims, Jewish people, all types of religious expression. And we have made a great effort to listen and to reach agreements for the benefit of the Venezuelan people. That is the main goal of this commission, in carrying out a broad and inclusive dialogue. Additionally, we would like to highlight the legislative progress made in the area of human rights. As part of this institutional effort of the National Legislative Branch, Venezuela once again is moving towards strengthening the social democratic state of justice and of law through a quite bold and accelerated process where we are generating new regulations so as to overcome the lag that was created over 5 long years of legislature from 2015 to 2020. And over the course of these 5 years, our parliament merely approved one law. I'll say it again, one law in 5 years. And they failed to fulfill the commitments that were taken on during the previous UPR cycle. Though the new legislature, established in 2021, or I should say rather, this new legislature established in 2021 has been carried out important work in our public institutions, this time within the judiciary, which requires that we delve even deeper in the creation of a legal framework that is aimed in particular at strengthening human rights, which is why we have approved new laws and reforms. I can mention the one that relates to the Military Justice Code, which for the very first time in the history of our country ensures that civilians are not tried in military criminal tribunals. The Penal Organic Code, which enshrines constitutional principles such as the presumption of innocence, among others, as well as the law for the protection of victims, witnesses, that broadens the scope for addressing the cases of victims of human rights. In the Prison Code, which continues to bring an even greater humane face to our prisons, as well as the law on the statute for the police forces, which creates a new body within the police that aims to prevent and investigate cases that might violate human rights. These are, among others, some of the areas in which we have made progress in the area of human rights within the legislative branch of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Deputy. Well, President Villegas, I will give you the floor again to continue this interactive dialogue with other countries. Thank you very much, Your Excellency. We will continue with a list of speakers, and up next we have, and here let's cross our fingers, that we will hear from the Czech Republic without any technical glitches. Video statement.
The Czech Republic welcomes the delegation of Venezuela. We regret that our previous recommendations have not been implemented. We, therefore, recall our recommendations to promote equal participation in political and public affairs as a key means of overcoming the current political and humanitarian crisis. Adopt measures preventing reprisals against individuals and groups cooperating with international human rights mechanisms. establish a free and enabling environment for the work of civil society organizations, and ensure that human rights defenders and civic activists are not persecuted, harassed, or publicly stigmatized. Ensure the independence of the judiciary and enact a comprehensive review of legislation and practice aimed at guaranteeing the right to a fair trial for everyone.
Muchas gracias. Le damos la palabra a la
Thank you very much. We would like to give the floor now to the Democratic Republic of Korea.
Thank you, Mr. President. The DPRK delegation warmly welcomes the delegation of Bolivian Republic of Venezuela and appreciate for its comprehensive short national report. We commend the government of Venezuela for its strenuous efforts and tangible progress in the promotion and protection of human rights since second cycle of UPR. While extending our solidarity with the government and people of Venezuela in their struggle to defend national sovereignty, preserve peace and stability, and guarantee the democratic institutions, and rejecting all kinds of foreign interference, my delegation recommends the following. 1. Continue its efforts to promote sustainable economic and social development while protecting population from the systematic and continued aggression by the foreign forces against the people and the institutions of Venezuela. 2. Continue guaranteeing the right to education at all levels.
Se ha excedido en el tiempo.
Our apologies, but the time has been exhausted. We must move on to our next delegation. We move on now to the next delegation. Djibouti has the floor. Mr. President, I would like to welcome the delegation of Venezuela and to thank them for the presentation of the report. My delegation welcomes Venezuela for the progress that it has made over the past cycle to align its national legislation with international standards and principles, as well as for its collaboration with United Nations bodies. And this led to the signing of a letter of understanding in 2019 with the High Commissioner of Human Rights. Djibouti would like to present Venezuela the following recommendations: to pursue efforts to efficiently combat poverty and to improve the life of the most vulnerable sectors of the population while improving the measures to attenuate the effects of COVID-19 pandemic. In addition, to pursue efforts taken to combat trafficking in human beings, particularly sexual exploitation of children and women, by combating the practice and traffickings. Djibouti wishes every success to Venezuela over the course of the present review. Thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you. The Dominican Republic has the floor. Thank you, sir. We would like to thank the delegation of Venezuela for the presentation of their national reports. And with all due respect, we would like to recommend, first, to improve the framework for the promotion and protection of human rights by ratifying international agreements on human rights that have not been signed into, including the optional protocol of the Convention Against Torture and the International Convention. The interpreters apologize, but we must stop interpreting due to poor quality in the sound.
Intensificar los esfuerzos que permitan mejorar las garantías y disposiciones previstas en el Pacto Internacional de Derechos Civiles y Políticos relativas al ejercicio de las libertades fundamentales y al derecho a participar en la vida pública y política. Asimismo, la República Dominicana insta a Venezuela a continuar la cooperación con el sistema de derechos humanos de las Naciones Unidas.
Se excedió en el tiempo. La delegación.
I must intervene as the delegation of the Dominican Republic, says the President. I apologize. I must apologize, but we have to move on to the next speaker, and for the poor quality of the sound, which had an impact on the interpretation services. Without further ado, we would like to give the floor now to the delegation of Ecuador. Thank you, Mr. President. Ecuador would like to express its gratitude to the delegation of Venezuela for presenting its reports, and with a constructive spirit, we would like to respectfully present the following recommendations. 1. To adopt urgent measures to put an end to the violations of human rights, combating impunity, and to punish those responsible. 2. To put an end to acts of persecution and intimidation, against dissident voices and political opposition, and to guarantee the effective enjoyment of the rights to the freedom of expression and of opinion, as well as peaceful assembly and association. Third and last, to fully cooperate with the United Nations human rights system, among others, allowing access of international independent missions to the country. Ecuador wishes every success to Venezuela in the final adoption of their UPR report. Thank you.
Muchas gracias. Tiene la...
Many thanks. Egypt is recognized.
الرئيس يرحب وفد مصر بالسيدة النائب.
Thank you. My delegation would like to welcome the Vice President of Venezuela and her delegation. We would like to thank her for the presentation. My delegation welcomes Venezuela's cooperation with human rights mechanisms of the United Nations, as well as its commitment to present reports to the review mechanism. My delegation welcomes as well the adoption for the Social Economic Plan 2019-2025. And in this constructive dialogue, we would like to present the following recommendations. First, to continue to promote the principles of independence and transparency of the judiciary, to provide proper compensation and have all necessary measures to that end. Also, to guarantee the right to food, particularly for children and women. To continue to work so as to promote the National Human Rights Commission. We wish Venezuela every success during this review.
Gracias. Tiene la palabra.
Thank you. Estonia has the floor.
The Republic of Venezuela has prepared a national report and provided the additional information today. We are deeply concerned that since the previous UPR, the human rights situation in Venezuela has seriously deteriorated in the context of ongoing political, social, economic, and humanitarian crises. Estonia notes positively an OHCHR presence in the country, which has allowed to monitor and document the human rights situation more closely and to engage in technical cooperation with the authorities. Estonia recommends to the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela to improve the situation of civil and political rights, respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms, and annual restrictions to civic and democratic space. Create a safe, non-discriminatory environment for the press, civil society, and humanitarian organizations, and ensure the safety of people working in these areas. Ensure guarantees of a fair trial and compliance with the constitutional requirements. Ratify the OPCAT. I thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you. Ms. Watini has the floor.
The Kingdom of Eswatini warmly welcomes the delegation of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. We welcome Venezuela's efforts to promote gender equality in Venezuela's society by discouraging any form of discrimination. We further welcome efforts made by Venezuela to subsidize public services like transport, electricity, fuel, and water. In the spirit of constructive criticism, we recommend Venezuela to continue improving the rights of women and girls, especially those living with disability, to continue to improve the quality of education. In conclusion, Eswatini wishes Venezuela success in its third cycle review. I thank you.
Muchas gracias. Tiene la...
Thank you. Ethiopia has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Ethiopia welcomes the delegation of Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, led by Her Excellency Ms. Delcy Rodriguez Gomez, Vice President of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, to the fourth session of the EPR Working Group. We thank the delegation for the comprehensive national report. Ethiopia commends Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela for the efforts exerted to implement the recommendations received during the second cycle UPR, including the 24 voluntary commitments and the progress made since then. Further, Ethiopia appreciates the principled positions of Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela in the Human Rights Council. Ethiopia recommends 1. Strengthen cooperation with the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights based on mutual understanding and consent. 2. Step up the efforts of promoting equality, inclusion, and justice, including the integral development of Afro-Venezuelan communities. Finally, we wish the delegation a successful UPR engagement with the UPR Working Group. Thank you, Mr. President.
Muchas gracias. Tiene la palabra Fiji.
Thank you. Fiji is recognized.
Venezuela and commends it for its commitment towards protecting and promoting the human rights of the Venezuelan people despite many challenges, including the impact of unilateral coercive measures on the national economy. Fiji offers the following recommendations. 1. Improve access to adequate sexual and reproductive health services, in particular to antenatal, delivery, and postnatal services. 2. Strengthen efforts to address violence against women and children, and against all persons on the basis of their sexual orientation and gender identity, including measures to prevent violence and support survivors, as well as by removing obstacles that prevent access to justice. And 3. Intensify efforts to develop and strengthen the necessary legislative frameworks that address cross-sectoral environmental challenges, including climate change and disaster risk reduction frameworks. I thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you. I give the floor to Finland.
Chair, Finland welcomes the engagement of Venezuela in the UPR process. Finland recommends the following. Firstly, to fully cooperate with the ICC and its investigations and ensure an independent and reliable witness protection program. Secondly, to guarantee access to sexual and reproductive health services, including maternal health care for all women, including those with disabilities. Thirdly, to ensure that judicial authorities conduct, in accordance with international law, prompt, independent and impartial investigations and prosecutions of extrajudicial executions, torture and arbitrary arrests conducted by the national police and security forces. I thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you. I give the floor to the delegation of France, who is with us in the room. You have the floor. Thank you. President France is very disturbed by the profound deterioration of the situation in Venezuela as a result of a shrinking democratic space, absence of independence of the judiciary, and multiple violations of human rights committed by the regime. We recommend as follow. 1. Point of order from the delegation of Venezuela. Venezuela has the floor.
Gracias.
Thank you. We regret that the delegations in the room again are ignoring the proper UN terminology when addressing a sovereign state and its legitimate authorities. Therefore, we demand once more that you remind them of the rules in the room and to insist that states should refrain from using any terminology that is contrary to the standards of international law. Once again, we want to go on record in our firm rejection of the use of terms that are contrary to the rules of the UN system. I thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much for that point of order raised by the delegation of Venezuela. As in previous occasions, 3 elements must be in place: the right of each state to express their opinions, the language of cooperation, respect and transparency which must prevail during the UPR, and also UN standards that are very clear. As a subsidiary body of the UN General Assembly, the Human Rights Council abides by the position and official terminology of the United Nations, reflected in the relevant resolutions of the GA and of the Security Council. Therefore, based on those elements and the point of order, I would ask the Secretariat to adhere to the official terminology when preparing the final report, and we take note of the Venezuelan request that this statement goes on record, in the records of this statement. Thank you. I give the floor back to the delegation of France. You may continue.
Je vous remercie.
Thank you. We recommend as follows. 1, immediate unconditional release of all political prisoners and guarantee freedom and security of all political dissidents. 2, resume inter-Venezuelan political negotiations in Mexico to enable a negotiated solution to the crisis, including the holding of free democratic presidential legislative elections. 3, guarantee respect for rights of women and girls, in particular when it comes to sexual and reproductive health and combating gender-based violence. 4, implement policy to ensure the right to food, water and health for the Venezuelan population. I thank you.
Merci. Continuamos con...
Continue with the delegation of Gabon. Thank you, President. The delegation of Gabon wishes a warm welcome to the delegation of Venezuela. We congratulate them for the presentation of the national report. We support the positive measures and initiatives taken by Venezuela to combat all forms of violence against women, in particular by bolstering the legislative, institutional and other frameworks. However, challenges persist owing to the coronavirus pandemic. Therefore, in a constructive spirit, we recommend to Venezuela to, as follows: 1, adopt regulations on enforcing the law and the rights of women and have a life without violence, and adopt a national plan to combat violence against women. In conclusion, delegation of Gabon wishes every success to Venezuela in this review and in implementing the recommendations accepted. I thank you. I thank you. I give the floor to Georgia.
Thank you, Mr. President. We remain concerned with the dire situation of human rights in Venezuela, which is a result of years of corruption, political conflict, and repression. My delegation continues to call on the authorities in control to respect the constitutional mechanisms of the country in order to guarantee the rule of law. Therefore, Georgia recommends to Venezuela, first, to issue a standing invitation to the special procedures mandate holders. Second, to guarantee freedom of expression. Third, to ratify OPCAT. Fourth, to reverse his decision to withdraw from the American Convention on Human Rights. Fifth, to fully cooperate with the FFM, including by granting its team unrestricted access to the country. Sixth, to undertake independent investigations into all cases of human rights violations. And seventh, to take steps towards ensuring a peaceful solution to the existing crisis, leading to free and fair elections. Thank you, Mr. President.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. I give the floor to Germany.
Mr. President, Germany welcomes the delegation of Venezuela, acknowledges the small OHCHR country presence, and notes the permission of World Food Programme activities in 2021. However, it is concerning that our previous recommendation to safeguard freedom of expression has not been sufficiently implemented. Germany recommends to first, guarantee the independence and impartiality of the judiciary and the rule of law, including by observing existing rules for court hearings and reviews of remand orders. Second, intensify international cooperation on human rights, including by allowing a staff expansion of the OHCHR in Caracas and granting effective countrywide access. Third, allow for the expansion of the operation of humanitarian organizations like the World Food Programme and a safe environment for their work. Fourth, allow the fact-finding mission to operate in Venezuela. Thank you, Mr. President.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you. I give the floor to the delegation of the Holy See.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Holy See welcomes the delegation of Venezuela on the occasion of the presentation of its third Universal Periodic Review. The Holy See recommends to the delegation of Venezuela the following. 1, to continue efforts aimed at facilitating sincere and open dialogue with all stakeholders and promoting national reconciliation, including at the local level. 2, to reinforce policies to ensure access to...
do beg your pardon. We aren't getting interpretation. Can we rewind to the video to the start, because I'm told there's no interpretation.
Me decían que no escuchaba. Podemos intentar nuevamente, por favor.
Can we try the video once more of the Holy See?
Santa Sede.
Holy See, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Holy See welcomes the delegation of Venezuela on the occasion of the presentation of its third Universal Periodic Review. The Holy See recommends to the delegation of Venezuela the following. 1, to continue efforts aimed at facilitating sincere and open dialogue with all stakeholders and promoting national reconciliation, including at the local level. 2, to reinforce policies to ensure access to essential services, including food supply, medical assistance, and the right to quality holistic education. 3, to strengthen national measures to combat criminal violence, especially as regards arbitrary detentions, extrajudicial executions, and the disproportionate use of force by civil and security forces. 4, to ensure the independent character of all aspects of the justice system and guarantee access to this system to all people so as to combat impunity and provide redress to victims. Thank you, Mr. President.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. I give the floor to Iceland, who is in the room. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Iceland welcomes the Delegation of Venezuela and its national report. Iceland makes the following recommendations. Accept and facilitate a permanent presence of the OHCHR. Adopt a national action plan on addressing violence against women and girls. Prevent all forms of discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation, gender identity and expression, and sex characteristics. And allow same-sex marriage by modifying the Constitution, the Civil Code, and the Organic Code of Civil Registration. I wish Venezuela all success for its review. Thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you. I give the floor to India.
Mr. President, India welcomes the delegation of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela and thanks them for the comprehensive presentation on the action taken to implement the recommendations received during the second UPR. India commends Venezuela for its efforts to combat inequality, reduce poverty, and to prevent human trafficking, including the adoption of the National Action Plan to combat trafficking in persons 2021-2025. In the constructive spirit and dialogue, India recommends the following to the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. 1. Continue strengthening the national human rights institution in accordance with the Paris Principles. And 2. Continue taking measures towards combating all forms of discrimination against persons with disabilities. We wish the delegation of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela all success in its future endeavors. Thank you, Mr. President.
Gracias. Tiene la palabra.
Thank you. I give the floor to Indonesia.
Thank you, Mr. President. My delegation thanks the Delegation of Venezuela for their presentation. We acknowledge its cooperation with UN agencies in implementing the National Human Rights Action Plan. For this cycle, Indonesia recommends the following. 1. Take concrete and immediate action to ensure the availability of essential needs including food, electricity, clean water, and medicine. 2. Take all necessary measures to ensure fulfillment of the right to education for all children. And 3. Promote democracy through strengthening of democratic institutions and citizens' right to participate in political and public affairs, including with possible bilateral cooperation with friendly countries. We wish Venezuela success in this review and in full implementation. I thank you.
Gracias. Le vamos a dar.
Thank you. We're going to give the floor now to the delegation of the Dominican Republic. They had sound problems earlier, so I'd ask if we can try that again with them, because we can't wait till the end. So I'll give the floor again to Dominican Republic. Hopefully it'll work this time. You have the floor.
Muy bien, muchas gracias, presidente. Saludamos a la...
Thank you. It welcomes the delegation of Venezuela and respectively we recommend bolster the framework of guarantees of protection with the ratification of international human rights treaties outstanding, including the optional protocol to the Convention Against Torture and the International Convention on the Protection of All Persons from Enforced Disappearance. Secondly, step up efforts to improve provisions, align provisions with the ICCPR with respect to exercise of fundamental freedoms and the right to participate in public and political life. We urge Venezuela to continue cooperation with the UN human rights system, in particular with OHCHR and the Human Rights Council mechanisms through the... Your time is up, distinguished delegate. I thank you.
Continuamos.
We will continue with the Islamic Republic of Iran. You have the floor.
Venezuela to this session of UPR Working Group. We commend the unwavering commitment of the Venezuela to the promotion and protection of human rights of its people. Iran welcomes many work being done by the government to mitigate severe impact of pandemic despite the imposition of unilateral coercive measures against the country. Iran expresses deep concern on continued imposition of unilateral coercive measures against Venezuela, which have disastrous effect on fundamental human rights of its people. Iran recommends Venezuela, 1, to continue its efforts to counter unilateral coercive measures in order to eliminate the negative effect of these unlawful measures on human rights of Venezuelan people. 2, continue implementing national plans for economic recovery based especially on the most vulnerable sectors of society, thus guaranteeing the promotion and protection of their fundamental rights. Iran wishes Venezuela a
Muchas gracias.
I thank you. I give the floor to Iraq.
Mr. President, the delegation of Iraq welcomes the head and members of the delegation of Venezuela, especially Mrs. Nancy Rodriguez, the Vice President of the country, and we welcome all efforts exerted by Venezuela to enhance human rights, and we commend its efforts to achieve national reconciliation and to fight poverty, corruption and bribes, and to develop the legal and judicial system. And we recommend to pursue efforts to improve the protection of human rights and fundamental freedoms, and to improve the living standards of the population and the social and economic development.
Thank you. I give the floor to Ireland.
Ireland welcomes the delegation of Venezuela and thanks it for its presentation today. Ireland notes Venezuela's progress in advancing cooperation with international human rights bodies, including the increased OHCHR presence, but regrets a lack of progress on some recommendations from previous UPR cycles. It is important that Venezuela take concrete steps to ensure respect for civil society space and to restore judicial independence. Ireland recommends that Venezuela, 1, conduct a review of the laws and regulations on terrorism, financing, registration and funding that are imposed on civil society organisations to ensure they are in line with international human rights standards. And 2, implement effective measures to restore judicial independence to ensure that the justice system is guided by internationally accepted legal principles. We wish Venezuela every success in this UPR cycle. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to Israel.
Thank you, Mr. President. The situation of human rights in Venezuela remains extremely concerning. The Venezuelan government continues to intimidate, harass, and attack anyone who opposes them. The migration crisis of the regime's own making has seriously affected human rights. We commend neighboring countries such as Colombia, who have facilitated a large flow of migrants.
Point of order. Delegation of Venezuela has a point of order. Thank you very much. I'm forced to intervene once again to demand once more from those states that address a sovereign state to avoid the use of terms which are completely contrary to international law and which, moreover, are not befitting the scene of a UPR that we're having here. We regret also that the delegation using the floor seeks to criticize another country when itself, and when we're looking at the progress made of a country and human rights. Therefore, we urge, once again, the presidency to make the necessary amendments to ensure we avoid such statements and to remind delegations of the need for them to stick with the rules when delivering their statement. And we would like our protest to go on record in protest to preserve the dignity of my country and also to guarantee the proper functioning of this universal periodic review. Thank you very much again for your understanding, President.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. On point of order, I remind you that this UPR process was created specifically to be held in an inclusive, constructive spirit to consider human rights situations in all member states of the UN, and we trust that the dialogue should be a respectful dialogue. We cannot expect expect states to share points of view all the time, but we do expect them to share their opinions and positions, and when they do it, that they should fully respect the terminology, rules and standards of the UN and conduct and respectful conduct. And we would stress the request of Venezuela. We take note of the wish for their statement to go on the records of the meeting. With that, I'll give the floor back to the delegation of Israel.
And refugees. Israel remains concerned by the use of force by security forces known for their brutality, who continue to be armed and supported by the international state-backed terror organizations and foreign governments who do not only seek to destabilize the Middle East but also the whole world. In this regard, Israel recommends that Venezuela, 1, eliminate the excessive use of force as a policy to repress peaceful demonstration, 2, immediately hold free and fair elections and restore democracy. I thank you, Mr. President.
Gracias.
Thank you. I give the floor to Italy.
Thank you, Mr. President. We thank the distinguished delegation of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela for the report and presentation. Italy welcomes and supports the OHCHR program to advance human rights in Venezuela. Italy offers Venezuela the following recommendations: stop all forms of torture and forced disappearances, arbitrary detention and extrajudicial executions, duly investigate all alleged cases and ratify the Convention on Enforced Disappearance and the OPCAT. Guarantee freedom of expression and opinion on and offline and access to justice for victims of these violations. Ensure that human rights defenders, journalists, and humanitarian workers can operate in a safe environment. Facilitate the permanent presence of the OHCHR and allow access to the independent international fact-finding mission. Strengthen the independence and impartiality of the judiciary. Combat all forms of gender-based violence and discrimination. We wish a successful review. I thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you. I give the floor to Japan.
Japan warmly welcomes the delegation of Venezuela to this session. Japan takes note of positive steps taken by Venezuela since the previous review, notably its cooperation with the OHCHR through the signing of the MOU in 2019 and the start of the national dialogue in 2021, hoping for its immediate resumption this year. Japan would like to make 3 recommendations. 1. Expand areas of cooperation with OHCHR, including by assuring the free and safe movement of OHCHR staffs and their unhindered access to detention centers and other facilities, and promote cooperation with ICC. 2. Ratify the International Convention for Protection of All Persons from Enforced Disappearance as early as possible. And 3. Take concrete measures to ensure freedom of opinion and expression, as well as freedom of media, taking into account reports submitted by human rights treaty bodies and institutions. We wish the delegation of Venezuela every success in the review.
Thank you.
I give the floor to the delegation of Kuwait. Thank you. First of all, I'd like to wish a warm welcome to the head of delegation of the Republic of Venezuela and his delegation. I'd also like to welcome the national report before us for the valuable information it contains regarding progress made in strengthening human rights. The report highlights the major efforts made by Venezuela when it comes to eradicating poverty, which is one of the central goals of the Venezuelan state's policy. We want to make the following recommendations. 1. Continue supporting public services, in particular those linked to electricity, water and communications. 2. Continue providing free of charge primary education and healthcare for all. 3. Continue implementation and expanding the social protection plans. In conclusion, we wish Venezuela every success in this review. I thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you. I give the floor to Lau.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Laupedia welcome Venezuelan delegation to this UPR and thank them for the comprehensive report. My delegation commends Venezuela for the progress made in the implementation of the recommendations adopted during the second UPR cycle. In constructive spirit, the Laupedia wishes to offer the following recommendations. 1. continue implementing its national policy to alleviate poverty in the country, and 2, continue taking adequate measures to positively guarantee the right to food of the Venezuelan people. We wish Venezuela a great success in this UPR. I thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you. I give the floor to the delegation of Lebanon.
Lebanon warmly welcomes the distinguished delegation of Venezuela and thanks them for their presentation. Lebanon recognizes the efforts of the government to tackle the problems facing the country and to improve the well-being of the population. In a spirit of constructive dialogue, we would like to recommend 1. Pursue the implementation of sound public policies aiming at eradicating extreme poverty. 2. Continue the cooperation with OHCHR to promote human rights and especially to guarantee due attention to the prison population. In conclusion, we wish Venezuela all the success in the review. Thank you, Mr. President.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Ambassador of Lebanon. I apologize because I didn't have my glasses on. I didn't see the delegation of Latvia. Latvia has the floor.
Latvia welcomes the delegation of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela to the UPR Working Group and thanks for presenting its national report. We would like to recommend to the government of Venezuela 1. To promote and protect the right to freedom of assembly, freedom of expression and media freedom, as well as the safety of journalists. 2. To take measures to foster a safe, respectful and enabling environment for civil society and human rights defenders, especially women human rights defenders, free from persecution, intimidation and harassment. 3. To conduct full and impartial investigations of all threats and attacks against and killings of journalists, civil society actors and human rights defenders, and hold the perpetrators accountable. And 4. To respond positively to all pending visit requests of the special procedures and extend a standing invitation to the mandate holders. I thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you. Now we're going to give the floor back to the delegation of Venezuela in Caracas. Excellency, you have the floor. Thank you very much. We continue learning about certain positions. The government in Tel Aviv, which has massacred Palestinian children, families, that has evicted the whole Palestinian people from its territory. It's come here to give lessons in human rights. That's the basic problem, you see. When you have a physical space, such as the Human Rights Council, and you have the aggressors and victims in the same place, and one sees the human rights violations of the Palestinian peoples, and that is something in our country that will never happen in Venezuela. So we repudiate those kinds of aggressions against Venezuela. They have no foundation. They are completely divorced from reality. Some European countries spoke, countries who joined in applying UCMs against Venezuela. That's a situation, it's a contradictory situation, complete double standards when it comes to human rights. When an aggressor that applies UCMs to systematically violate rights, the human rights of the Venezuelan people, and then they come here to pass judgment on Venezuela. So in this interactive dialogue, as we continue the dialogue, I want to give the floor now to the Minister of the Popular Power for Penitentiary Service. Thank you, President. Microphone, please, for the... I will now present you the achievements of the last 5 years of the Penitentiary Service Ministry. We have developed and implemented public policy, efficient humanist policy, socialist and scientific policy that guarantee the human rights of the prison population. We have 89 penitentiary establishments, 40 for men, 18 for women, and 31 care facilities for adolescents in conflict with the law, with an average population of 39,876 inmates, and we've attended to 8,579 individuals have received non-custodial sentences, and that provides a total of 48,455. In that period, we should stress that as a result of UCMs imposed against the Venezuelan state, the budgetary deficit has led to a drop in investment in new infrastructure, equipment, material and resources needed to provide proper care and ensure the proper operations of the institution. Nevertheless, our ministry has implemented plans, programs and projects to bolster the penitentiary system, which are as follows. With regards legal care, we ensure due process in coordination with the justice administration organs, avoiding any procedural delays. We've included virtual hearings, making criminal processes more effective. Comprehensive attention is given on a daily basis at all levels in the fields of culture, art, music, sport, religion, capacity building and work training to inmates. We guarantee the right to life, health, family visits and contact, and safe spaces, peace, social discipline, security. We have penitentiary public officials who are highly qualified. Proof of this are the following figures. 1 million legal interventions, 4.7 million comprehensive care interventions, 495,883 legal and comprehensive interventions for adolescents in conflict with the law. Today we can report that we've managed to provide 100% of the penitentiary population with COVID vaccinations, 2.3 million healthcare interventions, 289,123 interventions with families. We've trained 17,700 penitentiary officers. We've reduced violent deaths to a level of 0.05% within penitentiary facilities. We've carried out 14 projects to provide 4,560 new places to increase the capacity in prisons. This way, as a result, we don't have overcrowding in penitentiary facilities. We should stress that the state has developed the necessary mechanisms to eradicate prison overcrowding in detention, in pre-trial detention facilities. We have a penitentiary security technology system which monitors and controls in real time detention facilities. It also allows non-invasive body inspections. At an international level, we've guaranteed consular visits to foreign inmates. We've received visits from the OHCHR and from the International Committee of the Red Cross. In conclusion, in 2021, by presidential decree, we have assumed the custody of inmates within the pre-trial detention centres of the Bolivarian Service of the National Intelligence and of the Director Generalship of Military Counterintelligence, incorporating them within our ministry. Our country guarantees the full respect for human rights, I want to stress. With a penitentiary system that is above international standards, we seek the social reintegration of inmates to allow them to get back to a new life.
The Bolivarian government, through the Public Ministry for Internal Justice, Peace, is the governing body in citizen security and has promoted, over the past few years, a set of public policies aimed at protecting, defending, and guaranteeing human rights. A few examples of these include strengthening the promotion of the Bolivarian police plan, which is based on the respect for human rights, the political professionalization, and community protection. To that end, actions were taken, such as the review and update of manuals and standards of procedures to follow in controlling protests. Additionally, the action of technical teams when ensuring the differentiated and progressive use of force, and that is a task that was carried out with the support of the Office of the High Commissioner of the United Nations. Also, in cooperation with said office, we are adapting specialized services, contributing to the restructurization of the National Bolivarian Police with an approach that protects human rights. We have also made headway in the professional, technical, and scientific training of our police officers and of other citizen security bodies through the National Experimental University of Security, known as Unidas, and working in alliance with actors such as the International Committee for the Red Cross, International Red Cross Committee. We also created the law. Well, in fact, the National Commission for Human Rights was created by a decree, and that body was created to investigate all allegations of violations of human rights that might involve the police force. As a higher governing body with oversight over internal police agencies, making progress in strengthening the disciplinary mechanisms within the police forces. In 2018, the Bolivarian Republic renewed the public policy on citizen security, giving way to the mission known as Quadrants of Peace. And under this new mission, we territorialize the territory so as to protect the population, providing security from a comprehensive and preventive approach, one that is also participatory and where responsibility is shared, which is much closer to the concept of human security that has been promoted by the United Nations organization. Among key aspects of the security policy, we also find voluntary disarmament of the population. And in this area, the national government led to the destruction of over 135,928 firearms. Additionally, preventive measures for early detection and improvement of actions in the area of justice have led to constant awareness raising in the area. And official data generated by the Venezuelan Observatory of Security, which is the governing body of the country in the area of statistics on security and crime, where in 2016 there was a homicide rate of 56 per every 100,000 inhabitants. In 2021, the same rate dropped to 10 homicides per 100,000 inhabitants. In 2016, we created the National Office for the Comprehensive Care for Victims of Violence, created as an institution that creates policies for assisting people that have been victims of violence. And this was done in cooperation with the Office of the High Commissioner of the United Nations for Human Rights, which provides constant technical assistance to strengthen this pursuit throughout the entire territory. Additionally, we had standards for behavior for the National Police Force for the early and timely investigation of violence against women in all investigation procedures, with the goal of ensuring the proper implementation of the organic law of the rights of women to a life free from violence. Over the course of this report, we also strengthened measures to prevent and to punish human trafficking, and we approved the National Plan to Combat Human Trafficking 2021-2025, with the goal of developing a comprehensive policy in this area. Between 2017 and September 2021, we tallied a total of 30,191 public protests, which is proof of the full enjoyment of the right to assembly and to protest in this country. Additionally, we implemented a unified protocol of criteria to address security control and evaluation in care for victims, and we continue to make progress in changing the standards of the Centers of Preventive Detention. However, we are aware of pending challenges, and we shall continue to work arduously to duly enforce the dignities for proper life of the Venezuelan people. Thank you. Thank you very much, Vice Minister, and I would like to give the floor to the President of the Council to continue the dialogue. Thank you very much, Your Excellency. Pursuing with the list of speakers, we have Liechtenstein.
Liechtenstein, si podemos.
Liechtenstein, can we play the video, please?
And welcomes the distinguished delegation of Venezuela and wishes to thank for the information provided in the introductory statement and the national report. In a constructive spirit, Liechtenstein recommends that Venezuela first establish specialized institutions and policies to document cases of migrants, women, children, and the most vulnerable becoming victims of human trafficking, forced prostitution, and sexual slavery, and to protect them from such occurrence. Second, to enforce the implementation of the Organization Act and women's right to a life free of violence more strictly, and to adopt a national plan of action to counteract sexual and gender-based violence, which increased during the COVID-19 pandemic. And third, to take effective steps to guarantee the independence, autonomy, stability of the justice system and judges, and to combat corruption, intentional political interference in trials, and impunity, as well as eliminate obstacles to grant everyone access to justice, to instate the rule of law. We thank you.
Gracias. Tiene la palabra.
Thank you. Lithuania is recognized.
Thank you, President. Lithuania welcomes the delegation of Venezuela and takes note of its national report. We're deeply concerned about the human rights situation in Venezuela and recommend the following. First, to ratify the OPCAT and the International Convention for the Protection of All Persons from Enforced Disappearance. Second, to develop and adopt a new national plan on human rights. Third, to cooperate with the fact-finding mission and implement its recommendations. Fourth, to promote national reconciliation by releasing political detainees. Fifth, to ensure that detention conditions comply with the Nelson Mandela rules. Sixth, to cease harassment and criminalization of civil society organizations and independent media. Seventh, to ensure respect for freedom of assembly, opinion, and expression for peaceful demonstrators or protesters. Lithuania wishes Venezuela a successful review. I thank you.
Thank you. Luxembourg is recognized. We would like to welcome the delegation of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela and thank them for the presentation of the national reports. My delegation would like to present the following recommendations to Venezuela. 1. To collaborate with the human rights system of the United Nations, particularly by submitting to treaty bodies all the reports and by cooperating with the Council and the human rights mechanisms. To review its security policy so as to respect international rules and principles on the use of force and human rights, and to establish the civil nature of the police force with an internal oversight mechanism. 3. To take efficient and immediate measures to reestablish the independence of justice and to guarantee the independence of its bodies, particularly the General Prosecutor and the Ombudsman. We wish Venezuela every success in the implementation of the recommendations presented during this cycle of the UPR. Thank you.
Gracias. Tiene la palabra.
Thank you. Malaysia is recognized.
Malaysia thanks Venezuela for the comprehensive presentation on its national report. Malaysia is pleased to note key developments in Venezuela in addressing violence against women, including addressing complaints, conducting investigations, and providing support for victims of gender-based violence. Malaysia proposes the following recommendations for the consideration of Venezuela. Continue implementing its National Human Rights Plan 2016-2019, particularly with regard to the social protection programs that support women, children, and persons with disabilities. Continue its efforts in developing a national plan on business and human rights, and make further efforts to continue the implementation of training programs on various human rights issues for public servants. We wish Venezuela a successful review. Thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. Maldives has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Maldives welcomes the high-level delegation from the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela to this third cycle review and thank them for their presentation today. The Maldives congratulates the government of Venezuela for the consultative approach taken in the development of their national report. We welcome the establishment of an official OHCHR presence in the country to provide technical assistance and to monitor the human rights situation in Venezuela. In constructive spirit, the Maldives presents the following two recommendations to Venezuela. 1. To adopt a national action plan to address violence against women and to ensure that necessary resources are allocated to implement this plan. 2. To take necessary measures to guarantee equal access to social protection programs. We wish the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela a successful review. Thank you, Mr. President.
Gracias.
Thank you. Malta is recognized.
Thank you. Malta welcomes the delegation of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela and thanks it for the presentation of the national report. We would like to make the following recommendations. 1. Ensure respect for freedom of assembly, opinion, and expression for individuals engaging in peaceful demonstrations in accordance with the Constitution. 2. Urgently work with international agencies and local humanitarian workers to design and effectively implement a national plan to address the ongoing humanitarian emergency. We wish the delegation of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela a successful review session. I thank you.
Muchas gracias. Tiene la palabra
Thank you very much. Mexico is recognized. Thank you, Mr. President. We are grateful to the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela for presenting the report. We recognize the renewal of the Letter of Understanding with the Office of the High Commissioner for the operation of a country office, and we encourage them to continue to collaborate with human rights mechanisms. So as to improve human rights policies, Mexico recommends 1. To harmonize the national legal framework with international standards in human rights, to address imprecisions that might restrict fundamental freedoms and the work of human rights defenders. 2. To improve capacity so as to carry out swift, exhaustive, and impartial investigations on cases of enforced disappearances, arbitrary detentions, and the excessive use of force. 3. To strengthen institutions and policies in the area of human trafficking and to provide assistance and comprehensive protection to victims. Thank you.
Gracias. Tiene la palabra.
Thank you. Montenegro is recognized.
Montenegro.
Montenegro welcomes the distinguished delegation of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela and its engagement in the UPR process. Montenegro welcomes an enlarged presence of the OHCHR in the country, which followed the renewed letter of understanding. We also acknowledge the establishment of an independent international fact-finding mission with a view to ensuring accountability for the most serious crimes and justice for victims and the extension of its mandate. Montenegro recommends to the Venezuelan authorities to strengthen the National Commission for the Prevention of Torture, Cruel, Inhuman, or Degrading Treatment in compliance with the international human rights norms and guarantee the representation of all institutions as indicated by the law. And second, to implement a comprehensive reform of security institutions and policies to effectively address human rights concerns and provide redress to victims of human rights violations. I thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you. Namibia is recognized. I believe they were in the room.
Ahí. Sí, embajador. Tiene la palabra.
Ambassador, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Namibia welcomes the esteemed delegation of Venezuela, led by Her Excellency Delcy Rodriguez, Executive Vice President of Venezuela, to the third cycle UPR. While taking note of the positive human rights impact measures taken by Venezuela during the period under review, we again deplore the illegal sanctions imposed on Venezuela and reiterate our call for their immediate removal, given their negative impact on the enjoyment of human rights in Venezuela. In the spirit of constructive dialogue, we make the following recommendations for consideration. 1. Accede to the 1951 Convention relating to the status of refugees. And 2. Develop a national action plan to comprehensively address gender-based violence. We wish the delegation of Venezuela a successful review. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Thank you. Tiene la palabra.
Nepal is recognized.
Mr. President, Nepal warmly welcomes the delegation of Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela to the third cycle of UPR and thanks them for the presentation of report. The National Plan 2019 to 2025 for the economic and social development aiming to preserve environment is praiseworthy. We take appreciative note of the National Plan to combat trafficking in persons 2021 to 2025. While wishing Venezuela a successful review, we recommend the following for their consideration. 1. Consider implementing measures to upgrade the Office of the Ombudsman to a A category institution in line with the Paris Principles. 2. Continue measures to promote gender equality and counter all forms of discrimination. I thank you.
Thank you. The Netherlands has the floor.
Países
The
Bajos
Kingdom of the
tiene...
Netherlands remains concerned about the dire human rights situation in Venezuela. We commend and support all actors who strive to improve the human rights situation, including civil society organizations, human rights defenders, and UN mechanisms. A sustainable solution to the crisis in Venezuela can be found in a negotiated political solution. We recommend the authorities the following: take appropriate action and measures to guarantee a safe working environment for civil society, including human rights defenders, civil society organizations, educators, and healthcare and humanitarian aid workers. Free from fear of threats, reprisals, persecution, and arbitrary imprisonment, and unwarranted limitations to the freedom of association. Take effective measures to ensure freedom of expression, free access to information, and press freedom, including by guaranteeing independent investigations in all allegations of crimes against journalists. Gracias.
Thank you very much. New Zealand has the floor.
Mr. President, New Zealand welcomes the participation of Venezuela today. New Zealand remains seriously concerned human rights in Venezuela have worsened since its last UPR. New Zealand recommends Venezuela return to the negotiating table to continue discussions towards a peaceful, democratic and negotiated solution to the current crisis. New Zealand recommends Venezuela ensure respect for democratic rights such as freedom of assembly and expression and full participation in electoral processes by all parties. New Zealand recommends Venezuela address the lack of access to sexual and reproductive health services for women and girls. New Zealand recommends Venezuela cease the repression of independent Venezuelan civil society. Thank you.
Gracias. Y ahora...
Thank you. I would like to recognize the Ambassador of Nicaragua, who is here with us in the room. Thank you very much, Mr. President. With all due respect, we would like to welcome the full delegation of the government of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, those that are in Caracas and the part of the delegation that is here as well. Obviously, Nicaragua is aware of the progress that has been highlighted with a great level of detail by the delegation that is presenting their third UPR report today. And with fraternal spirit, we would like to recommend that they continue to combat inequality and poverty, maintaining efforts to subsidize public services that have been attacked by unilateral coercive measures imposed by foreign governments. Secondly, to continue their program to strengthen gender equality. We believe that that is essential for the equal development of societies. And third, we believe that they should keep alive, completely alive, the principle that peace and liberty are the only dignified mechanism for living our lives. Thank you. Thank you, Ambassador. Niger has the floor. Thank you, sir. Niger extends a warm welcome to the Bolivarian delegation of Venezuela, and we congratulate them for the presentation of their detailed reports. Niger welcomes the results obtained by the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela in various social-economic areas, such as the reduction of poverty, improvement of education, and nutrition for children. With a constructive and interactive spirit in mind, Niger would like to recommend the following: that Venezuela pursue its efforts to promote the National Council on Human Rights. Niger wishes every success to Venezuela in the implementation of the recommendations issued from this cycle of the UPR. Thank you.
Merci. Tiene la palabra
Niger has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Nigeria commends the government of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela for its commitment to improve the social and economic well-being of its people despite the pervasive economic hardship. We unequivocally condemn the use of unilateral coercive measures against any country and applaud the government of Venezuela for its resilience and tenacity to improve the prosperity of its people, as well as initiatives put in place to subvert the adverse effects of the unlawful measures adopted against the country. While commending the government of Venezuela for its extensive efforts to ensure economic stability in the country, Nigeria wishes to recommend the need to broaden opportunities for participation in the economic and political space and submit the initial reports to the Committee on the Protection of the Rights of all Migrant Workers and members of their families. Finally, we wish the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela a very successful review process. I thank you, Mr. President.
Gracias.
Thank you. Norway is recognized.
Mr. President, Norway welcomes Venezuela's participation in the UPR process. We commend the cooperation established with the Office of the High Commissioner since the last review, as well as the concrete efforts towards conflict resolution through political dialogue. Norway recommends that Venezuela, 1, continues to search for peaceful and inclusive solutions through negotiations for the benefit of the Venezuelan people. 2, ensures judicial independence, establishes appropriate procedures for the appointment of judges, and ends the use of military tribunals to try civilians. 3, guarantees that NGOs, journalists, trade unionists, and human rights defenders can carry out their work without risk of persecution and removes the legal requirements for NGOs to register with the National Office Against Organized Crime. 4, complies with international standards for the use of force and the optional protocol to the Convention Against Torture. I thank you.
Thank you. Oman has the floor.
سعادة الرئيس يسرني أن أرحب برئيس وفد جمهورية فنزويلا.
Mr. President, it's a pleasure to welcome the head of the delegation of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. And we welcome the report submitted by that country and for their dialogue and interaction with the mechanisms. We have considered Venezuela's report under the UPR and would like to make the following recommendations. To continue to protect the most vulnerable groups of the population, to continue to improve prenatal and postnatal services, and lastly, to reduce the digital gap among students. We wish Venezuela every success and prosperity. Thank you.
Gracias. Tiene la palabra.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. We thank the Executive Vice President of Venezuela for presenting third UPR report. We commend Venezuela's engagement with the human rights machinery as also acknowledged by the High Commissioner for Human Rights. We share concerns expressed by the High Commissioner and special procedures over the socio-economic, humanitarian, and human rights impacts of extraterritorial sanctions on the people of Venezuela. We appreciate Venezuela's efforts to align its human rights framework with international obligations to promote reconciliation, combat inequality, and in ensuring access to basic services. We recommend Venezuela to continue pursuing national reconciliation as a means to advance the realization of human rights, prioritizing human rights education and training of state security forces in line with international best practices, and seeking international assistance to secure essential supplies of food, medicine, and electricity. I thank you.
Gracias. Tiene la palabra.
Thank you. The delegation of Panama is recognized. Thank you. Panama would like to thank Venezuela for the presentation of the national report, and with a constructive and cooperation spirit, we would like to recommend to extend an ongoing invitation to the special procedures of the Human Rights Council and to abide by the reports of the rapporteurs of extreme violence and extreme poverty, and to take on the commitments of 2019 to allow 10 visits between 2020 and 2022 on the Declaration of Boys, Girls, and Climate Action, and to ratify the Treaty on our conventions, to take on the commitment of the Nairobi Summit of the International Conference of Population and Development, which promotes social inclusion of young people, and the promotion of training programs for their participation in the labor market, to prevent violence, to assist in sexual and reproductive health, and to assist in civil activities for the youth. We wish Venezuela every success in this cycle. Thank you.
Gracias. Tiene la palabra.
Thank you. Paraguay has the floor. We would like like to welcome the Venezuelan delegation and thank them for the presentation of the national report. We welcome the efforts made by the office in providing technical assistance to Venezuela, and we have taken note of the recommendations to establish a country office. We also recommend cooperating with the mechanisms of the Council, particularly with the missions to fact-finding missions and special procedures, to establish the independence of the justice system, and to ratify the Convention Against Enforced Disappearances and the optional protocol of the Convention Against Torture and ILO Agreement 189. The Fact-Finding Commission found that the judiciary is a key instrument in Venezuela, and we are interested in knowing what steps shall be taken to reform the criminal and justice system. We are concerned over documented cases of alleged extrajudicial executions and torture under state agents, as well as the lack of cooperation with the Fact-Finding Commission. Many thanks.
Gracias.
Thank you. Peru has the floor. Mr. President, we would like to welcome the delegation of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, and we thank them for their presentation. We reaffirm our commitment to the currency of the rule of law and human rights in Venezuela, for which political and social dialogue is indispensable. With a constructive spirit, Peru recommends, first, to ratify the International Convention on the Protection of All Persons Against Enforced Disappearances. Second, to carry out reforms to strengthen the independent justice system. Third, to implement measures aimed at guaranteeing equal access to social assistance programs and to investigate allegations of discriminatory access to these services. And four, to redouble efforts to combat all forms of violence against women, particularly those deprived of freedom. Thank you.
Gracias. Tiene la palabra.
Thank you. The Philippines is recognized.
Thank you, Chair. The Philippines welcomes the delegation of Venezuela and thanks it for the presentation of its national report. My delegation acknowledges the efforts of Venezuela to implement the accepted recommendations during its second UPR cycle, in particular on the protection of the rights of women and children. In a constructive spirit, the Philippines presents the following recommendations for consideration by Venezuela. 1. Further strengthen the implementation of national poverty reduction measures with the conduct of inclusive periodic assessments. 2. Strengthen programs on women's economic empowerment, including on enhancing their access to credit and financial services, and technical and vocational education and training. And 3. Redouble its efforts in conducting training programs for duty bearers to enhance identification and referral of victims of trafficking in persons, especially women and children. We wish Venezuela every success in this review cycle. Thank you, Chair.
Gracias.
Thank you. I give the floor to Poland.
Poland thanks the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela for its participation in the third UPR cycle and presentation of its national report. Poland would like to recommend to Venezuela to ensure good cooperation with relevant UN bodies, especially with OHCHR and the mechanisms of the Council, and to recognize and collaborate with the independent FFM, to take measures to prevent human rights violations, such as torture and extrajudicial executions, and ensure investigation and sanctioning of perpetrators, to ratify OPCAT, an international convention for the protection of all persons from enforced disappearances, to respect freedom of assembly, opinion, and expression for individuals engaging in peaceful demonstrations, to re-engage in a meaningful dialogue with all Venezuelan stakeholders aiming at the peaceful solution of the present crisis. We are deeply concerned about the worsening human rights conditions in Venezuela. We believe that the re-establishment of the rule of law and democracy through free and fair election is crucial for the improvement of human rights situation in Venezuela. I thank you.
Thank you, Portugal.
Chairperson, Portugal welcomes the delegation of Venezuela and wishes it a successful EPR. Portugal regrets that human rights and humanitarian situations in the country have worsened since the last UPR cycle. We note with concern the conclusions of the fact-finding mission and recommend that Venezuela cooperates with the FFM. We welcome the renewal of the Memorandum of Understanding with the Office of the High Commissioner and recommend strengthening this cooperation and that envisaged missions of the Council's special procedures take place. Portugal further recommends that Venezuela, 1. Takes concrete steps to reinstall the independence of the judiciary and ensures accountability for human rights violations. 2. Continues to release political prisoners and creates an enabling environment for political opposition, human rights defenders and journalists. And 3. Halts all acts of torture and sexual and gender-based violence against detainees and ratifies the optional protocol to CAT. Thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you. I give the floor to Qatar.
ونشكرهم على العرض الذي تقدموا به حول الجهود
Thank you, President. We thank the head and members of Delegation of Venezuela for their briefing on their efforts to promote and protect human rights in the country. My delegation welcomes the adoption of the National Plan to Combat Trafficking 2021-25. Furthermore, we commend the adoption by the National Assembly of a draft reform of the founding law on the rights of women to a life without violence. My delegation would like to make the following recommendations: bolster measures to reduce poverty and improve living conditions, redouble efforts to continue providing education and training to law enforcement as to human rights standards applicable during their work, and continue their efforts to combat all forms of violence against women. Thank you.
Gracias. República de Corea.
President, the Republic of Korea acknowledges Venezuela's ongoing cooperation with the OHCHR. However, we remain concerned by the overall human rights situation in Venezuela, including the reported case of extrajudicial execution and arbitrary detention. Therefore, the Republic of Korea would like to recommend the following. First, take necessary steps to secure the independence and impartiality of the judiciary, ensuring that judicial actions are guided by the principle of legality and due process. Second, enhance effort to expand civic and democratic space with a special focus on the protection of journalists, human rights defenders, and political actors from intimidation and attacks. Third, safeguard the freedom of peaceful assembly and refrain from the excessive use of force against peaceful protesters. I thank you.
Gracias. Rumania.
Thank you. I give the floor to Romania.
Mr. Chair, Romania welcomes Venezuela's delegation and appreciates its involvement in the UPR process. Noting the economic, political, and social difficulties that impacted significantly the overall human rights situation in Venezuela since the last UPR, we nevertheless appreciate Venezuela's engagement with OHCHR, the legal steps and measures taken for ensuring the respect of the right to personal liberty and to strengthen the national dialogue, and to encourage their further improvement and implementation. Romania would like to recommend Venezuela to speed up the process of developing a new and sound national human rights plan for 2020-2025 cycle that takes into account the progress and loopholes identified during the implementation of the previous one, implement the national plan to combat trafficking in persons for 2021-2025 period, thus developing a comprehensive policy in the area of trafficking in women, children, and adolescents and smuggling of migrants, and to take legal and administrative measures for addressing the recommendations made for ensuring the freedoms of expression, opinion, association, and of the press, the right to peaceful demonstration, to food and education, as well as the public access to health services and medicines.
Gracias, Federación Rusa.
Thank you. I give the floor to Russia. President, we welcome Caracas's steps to protect and promote the rights and freedoms of vulnerable groups of the population. We condemn attempts by certain states to fuel the situation in the country by encouraging protest movements and which lead to internal unrest. We are against the practice of UCMs for exerting pressure on the Venezuelan leadership. Russia supports settling internal differences within Venezuela by the citizens of that country without foreign interference. We recommend, 1, continue cooperation with Human Rights Council special procedures, particularly with the Special Rapporteur on UCMs. 2, agree to the creation in the country of a OHCHR office, and 3, continue cooperation with OHCHR on issues of coping with the impact of UCMs that have been introduced against Venezuela. Thank you.
Spasiba, Arabia Saudita.
Give the floor to Saudi Arabia.
Mr. President, at the outset, I would like to welcome the Vice President, Mrs. Delcy Rodriguez, and we thank her for the efforts exerted in the protection of human rights in all aspects of life, which reflects the keenness of Venezuela to improve its track in the field of human rights. We have 2 recommendations. First, universal access to health care to all, especially the most vulnerable segments of the society. Second, to pursue efforts to achieve the right to nutrition and to improve family and urban agriculture and national food production. In conclusion, we wish Venezuela Venezuela all progress and development. Thank you, Mr. President.
Gracias.
Thank you, Timor-Leste.
Mr. President, Timor-Leste welcomes the delegation of Venezuela and thanks them for the presentation of their national report. At the outset, Timor-Leste wishes to commend Venezuela for establishing a special national institution for the protection of sex-diverse persons, as well as for establishing specialized institution on the trafficking of women and unaccompanied minors and on the protection of victims. With the view of strengthening the promotion and protection of human rights in Venezuela, Timor-Leste wishes to make two recommendations. First, that Venezuela strengthens the National Commission for the Prevention of Torture, Cruel, Inhuman, or Degrading Treatment. Second, that Venezuela steps up its efforts to ensure that humanitarian aid reaches those most in need. We wish Venezuela a successful UPR review. Thank you, Mr. President.
Gracias. Uzbekistan.
Thank you, Uzbekistan, please. Uzbekistan.
Uzbekistan, you have the floor. Uzbekistan, you have the floor.
Thank you, President. I want to welcome the delegation of Venezuela, congratulate them on the presentation of their third periodic report within the UPR. We note the government's consistent steps towards promoting and protecting human rights and fundamental freedoms. Special attention should go to the country's practical steps to bolstering cooperation with OHCHR and mandate holders. Our delegation makes the following recommendations. 1, complete development, with the support of OHCHR, of a protocol on joint investigation into cases of alleged violations of the right to life and begin effective implementation thereof. 2, step up efforts to further develop the healthcare system, in particular guarantee seek to progressively reduce the maternal mortality rate. Thank you.
Gracias, último orador.
Thank you. The last speaker is Colombia.
Presidente.
Thank you. We draw the attention of the working group regarding the lack of cooperation for the Venezuelan state with the UN human rights system. The international independent mission established by the Council to investigate grave human rights violations in Venezuela did not receive any cooperation. The lack of independence of the judiciary and its use to persecute opposition members is very troubling. Given the grave human rights situation, in November there was the announcement of an opening into a formal investigation in Venezuela. Due to the crisis, more than 5 million citizens have had to leave Venezuela. Approximately 1.8 million have been welcomed by Colombia. Only reinstating democracy will allow the Venezuelan people to overcome the grave human rights crisis in Venezuela. Thank you.
Con esto hemos terminado.
That brings us to the end. Thank you of the list of speakers. I give the floor back to the distinguished delegation of Venezuela in Caracas. Excellency, you have the floor to close the appearance of Venezuela in the UPR. Thank you. We're pleased that we were able to connect with Colombia. It gives us a chance to give some numbers. There's barely been 23 days. We're into 2022. In those 23 days, there have been 10 massacres in Colombian territory with almost 30 people dead. That's figures to give you for reflection, because notwithstanding the statements given, this is the reality of things. Now, we are going to be concluding soon, but before we do, I want to give the floor to the Human Rights Director, to the Judge of the Supreme Court of Justice, Mr. Ibarra, and to Leonel Parica. So I give the floor.
Gracias, Vicepresidente.
Thank you, Vice President. The Office of the Prosecutor in Venezuela follows the principles of equality and non-discrimination, guaranteeing to each of its citizens due access to justice and swiftness of criminal processes in each one of its fields of expertise. Inter alia, the human rights-based focus can be seen with major figures through prosecutorial acts regarding alleged human rights violations carried out by state agents, meaning that we have the following figures for you. 910 state security functions charges brought against them, 1,285 charged, 619 were imprisoned, 229 guilty verdicts. It's important to stress that from August 2017 up to December 2021, the prosecutor received many cases. There were 3 million filings. There was 13,519 charges, 4,762 indictments generally. Similarly, it's also important to stress that the prosecutor committed to protecting human rights and civil rights, as stipulated in our constitution, created an office of care to the victims in the field of human rights. It has legal status within the victim protection status. That office's main goal is multidisciplinary assistance. It's made up of professionals, legal professionals, psychological, social workers, and we have 1,017 citizens have benefited from their interventions. As to progress in the prosecutor when it comes to combating corruption, significant results have been achieved, including that special prosecutors in the field, in line with best practice, principles of transparency, have done a lot of work to combat corruption through their investigations. Similarly, it's also to state that the prosecutor on an ongoing basis carries out joint work with the OHCHR, whose goal was to offer timely, swift judicial resolution in various cases before it, committed to furthering petitions and to exchanging ideas to bolster positively the protection of human rights, as well as avenues for investigation to make progress there too. In terms of appointments for prosecutors within the prosecutor's office, the legal field we've sought to provide tenure to those officials who so wish it. Thank you. Thank you, Vice President. On behalf of the Venezuelan Judicial Branch, I'd like to set out as follows. Equality and non-discrimination are fundamental principles of human rights, and the Venezuelan judiciary adopts a human rights-based approach for all citizens, including those who've been historically excluded. Constitutionally, the judiciary enjoys independence, functional autonomy, financial administrative autonomy, as being the governing body of the judicial body, developing its activities through 7 chambers. The judiciary has redoubled its efforts to prevent all forms of discrimination and de jure and de facto equality between men and women. It has set up tribunals in the field of GBV. Access to specialized gender justice covers 100% of the national territory through specialized courts, standing at 75%, and with exceptional competence when it comes to dealing with cases of violence against women, as also with addressing cases with adolescents in conflict with the law. There was also there was a special court set up for adolescents to implement judicial policy to optimize the system of administration of justice in that field. In 2017, the Supreme Court of Justice promoted the use of inclusive and non-sexist language in all documents and resolutions and in all fields and in competences. The Court of Justice implemented the use of digital means within all courts in the country to guarantee due process, especially in times during the pandemic. The justice has a block of laws that guarantee respect and guarantees for human rights by the Venezuelan state, which include establishing, in cases of preventing arbitrary detention to ensure immediate appearance before the court. When there's a prohibition of civilians going to military courts, there will also be an appointment of specialized judges when it comes to the issue of habeas corpus. There's been implementation also of resolutions for standards for competition for promotion in the career. It shows that the existing 2,059 courts in Venezuela, including 492 municipal, civil and criminal tribunals, 1,323 first instance tribunals, have guaranteed access to justice as a fundamental element of complying with judicial trusteeship and and in line with the Constitution. Thank you very much. I will say we've only got a few minutes, President. We have to close, but first of all, I want to thank the public powers of Venezuela who've been with us. They're accompanied by the electoral powers. One of the spheres where we've had the greatest development is the participative process through the electoral participation. But I want to thank the many countries who have stressed the impact of UCMs on the enjoyment of human rights. We want to commend the majority of countries who made constructive proposals and sent positive messages recognizing the progress made in Venezuela, including under these conditions of pressure, dreadful pressure, as represented by UCM. So we know that the UPR is an instrument which enables us to study a sincere consideration of human rights, but it should also be reflected in the principles of impartiality. There should be no double standards. There should be no political instrumentalization, so that we can make sure for humanity, we can make sure we make ourselves more humane. Venezuela, therefore, insists on an end to the UCMs against our country, against all peoples around the world who've been victims of this crime against humanity. And we call on those countries who have been applying those measures. They should not be part of the Human Rights Council. Venezuela will continue, furthermore, to do its utmost to nullify the adverse impact of the predatory capitalist model, which only promotes violence, inequality. Now, in conclusion, I want to quote the Venezuelan writer Augusto Mijares. The hero is he who resists when others surrender, he who believes when others doubt, he turns against routine and against conformity, he who stays pure when others prostitute themselves. Venezuela is an example of this. It should serve as an example of the heroic people of Venezuela so that peoples of the world do not surrender. I thank all of you for being with us during this UPR. Distinguished President, thank you very much for your stewardship. Thank you. Distinguished Vice President, Excellencies, first of all, I'd like to thank the interpreters who've been very generous with their time and who have stayed on. Thank you very much to you. Thank you very much to the delegation of Venezuela. Thank you to all delegations who participated in various ways. Thank you to the Secretariat, to the UPR team. And with that, this meeting and just to remind you that we have the members of the Troika, Cuba, Somalia, Indonesia. The section of recommendation will be distributed at 6 p.m. on the 27th January for adoption on 28th of January in the afternoon, and the complete report with its summary that will be disseminated by email on 11th of February. We have reached the end of the meeting. We will meet again tomorrow morning at 9 for the UPR of Zimbabwe. Speaking time, 1 minute, 5 seconds for all. To those who wish to speak, they have to inscribe before 30 minutes before the start of the meeting, and with that, the meeting stands adjourned. I thank you all.